The omen, before time. Before history began, before the first city was born, the earth trembled beneath a sky that glowed with unfamiliar fire. In that forgotten age, when the stars still held their ancient order, the world was said to be ruled not by men, but by beings who walked between heaven and earth, the Anunnaki. Their dominion stretched across continents now drowned, their temples carved into mountains now broken. They were the keepers of order, the architects of civilization long before humanity learned to write its first word. Yet even gods, it seemed, could sense the approach of their own twilight. Ancient tablets, burned and fractured, whisper of omens seen in the heavens, twin comets crossing paths like swords, the trembling of the earth, and a darkness that spread across the lands of Sumer. The priests of Eridu spoke of the final star, a crimson wanderer that appeared in the skies for 40 days, heralding the end of an age. The Anunnaki watched, silent, as the heavens turned against them. Across the fertile plains between the Tigris and Euphrates, storms rose that no man could endure. The rivers, once sacred arteries of life, began to devour their banks, and the cities of the gods grew restless. Something immense was unfolding, not merely a change of weather, but a cosmic realignment. The great king, whose name the scribes would later erase, stood upon the steps of his ziggurat and looked to the east. It was said that his eyes reflected the light of a dying sun. His empire, vast and divine, was about to vanish beneath waves of fire and stone. There are fragments scattered across time that speak of this moment, not as myth, but as memory. From the Sumerian tablets to the hieroglyphs of Egypt, from the Mayan codices to the petroglyphs of Australia, all tell of a great disaster, a cataclysm that reset the world. Scholars today call it coincidence, but in the silence between their explanations lies an unease, a shadow of something greater. Could it be that these ancient witnesses described the same event, the one that ended the reign of the last Anunnaki king? Legends say he was not like the others. Where his forebears ruled with indifference, he ruled with longing. He saw in mankind a reflection of his own fading spark. While the gods of the heavens prepared to depart, he hesitated. He could not leave his creation behind, and so he defied the decree of the divine council. In secret, he gathered knowledge, scrolls, and relics, the essence of their civilization, and sealed them beneath the earth, believing that one day humanity would find them and remember. But the heavens are merciless. The cataclysm did not announce itself with a single blow. It unfolded as a slow death, a dance between fire and water. First came the trembling of the crust, then the rains, then the rising of the seas. From the frozen north to the sands of Africa, the earth convulsed. Entire continents sank. Mountains cracked. The once sacred cities of Eridu, Larsa, and Kish vanished beneath mud and ash. The king's last order was not of war or conquest, but of preservation. His scribes inscribed the tale of their beginning and end on tablets of fired clay, a message to a world that would not understand. As the final storm consumed his realm, the last king stood upon the altar of his ancestors and faced the sky. The crimson star, the omen, had grown vast and brilliant, a second sun in the heavens. Some say it was a comet. Others claim it was the return of Nibiru, the wandering planet of the gods. Whatever it was, its light scorched the horizon, and the air burned with the scent of iron. In that instant, the Anunnaki vanished from the record of man, not because they perished, but because the memory of their reign was buried beneath the weight of mud, myth, and time itself. Thousands of years later, when archaeologists uncovered the first fragments of cuneiform, they found stories of gods who descended from the stars, ruled for tens of thousands of years, and then departed after a great flood. To the academic world, these were fables, symbolic myths of creation and destruction. But to those who listened more closely, to those who felt the pulse of the earth beneath the ruins, they were something more. They were warnings. The omen, it seems, was not merely for them. It was for us. Every few millennia, the Earth's orbit wavers, the poles shift, and the cycle of destruction renews. The ancients knew this. The last king understood it. He tried to leave a map, encoded not in metal or stone, but in myth. The Epic of Gilgamesh, the tales of Ziusudra, the lines of the Mahabharata, all fragments of a single truth, that our world is not the first civilization to stand upon these lands. There were others before, erased by the same forces that now stir again. And so the question remains, who was the last Anunnaki king? Was he Enlil's heir, a demigod left behind? Or was he something far stranger, the bridge between gods and men, doomed to witness the death of both? His name may be lost, but his shadow remains, etched in the ruins, calling to us across 13,000 years of silence. For in that silence lies a warning that history refused to keep. But what if that warning was never truly forgotten? What if, beneath the sands of time, something still remembers the fall of the gods and waits for their return? Because what came next would change everything. The age of the gods. What came next would change everything, because to understand the last king's fall, we must first step into his dawn, the age when the Anunnaki walked openly among rivers that had not yet forgotten their first paths and stars that had not yet grown dim from human eyes. In the young light of that world, the gods were engineers of horizon and harvest, assigning measures to waters, weights to stones, and rhythms to sun and moon. They carved order from the raw noise of the planet, raising terraces where marsh met desert, straightening canals until their glittering lines mirrored the constellations overhead. Temples rose like mountains with deliberate angles, thresholds calibrated to the solstices, doorways aligned with the equinox dawn. They were not merely monuments, they were instruments, cued to the celestial clock the gods claimed to keep. And the people who clustered at the base of those stepped sanctuaries learned to read the sky, to time their seasons by a music that seemed to descend from the stairways themselves. In this choreography, the Anunnaki were both composers and conductors, directing the grain from seed to granary, the clay from mud to meaning, the breath of a child into the lineage of a city. They gave names to principles, as if naming tamed them, boundaries for chaos, measures for rain, rituals to coax the capricious river into a servant of bread. Writing appeared as if born full-grown, not an awkward script that stumbled through scratches and guesses, but a system with grammar and arithmetic, weights and contracts, calendars and hymns, the skeleton of a world that expected to last. The gods oversaw it all with the calm of those who had seen many beginnings and did not fear an end. They rewarded obedience with irrigation and law. They punished rebellion with drought and silence. In their presence, kings were stewards, not sovereigns, intermediaries binding clay to constellation. The future last king was not yet a whisper. He was a possibility within their order, a child of the system that taught him the sky was a ledger and time a contract. He learned that the horizon was not merely a distance but a promise, a covenant scratched into the stone of the world itself. In those centuries, or were they millennia, the cities of the south inhaled and exhaled like lungs. Eridu gathered the wisdom of marsh and spring. Uruk grew fat on grain and poetry. Nippur held the pivot of heaven. Kish cast its shadow long along trade routes that stitched the land to distant coasts. Each city kept a face turned upward to the stars, as if asking for a sign that the orchestra would not falter. The Anunnaki walked balconies in the cool before dawn, their garments whispering like river reeds, their gaze trained on patterns they alone fully understood. They measured precession, watched nodes where moon and sun lines crossed, marked the slow tilting of Earth, as if reading a pulse beneath a resting wrist. When the wind came from the east with a certain dryness, they would nod. When a conjunction unfolded against their predicted horizon, they would adjust the rituals by a day, a chant, a handful of incense. Precision, then reverence. Reverence, then control. That was the order of things. The gifts they gave were not all gentle. Metallurgy carried a cost. The smelting of ores bit into hills that had been ignored for ages, and the exhaust of that hunger left scars that would outlast the miners. Architecture demanded labor measured not in days, but in dynasties. Even memory was disciplined. Scribes were trained to etch the approved narrative into clay, while inconvenient fluctuations were left to dissolve in rain. Yet the gods also planted a different seed, one that no irrigation canal could contain: aspiration. The people learned not just to farm, but to imagine. They fashioned myths as scaffolding for their awe, building stories to reach the height of what they had seen. In that scaffolding, the Anunnaki were not only rulers, they were exemplars of a standard that a restless human heart would chase long after the balconies were empty. As centuries layered like silt, the Anunnaki consolidated their dominion with a lattice of treaties and thresholds. City to city, sanctuary to sanctuary, the world wove into a net strong enough to catch the weight of time, or so they hoped. But in the archives, the gods protected, tablets arranged by star, lists of omens matched to floods and eclipses, a quieter record accumulated. It spoke of cycles, of the planet's long inhale and exhale, of epochs when ice marched, when desert swallowed river, when lightning took root in sand and fused it into glass. The gods did not fear such cycles, but they respected them, and respect is only the first cousin of fear. They taught their priests to chant in ratios, to bind offerings to angles, to anchor prayers at the center of a courtyard that mirrored the dome of night. Ceremony was more than devotion, it was maintenance, the lubrication of the hinges between heaven and earth. The future last king grew into this maintenance like a craftsman into his tools. He learned the weights of offerings, the language of omens, the subtle hesitations in the river's spring flood that foretold a late harvest. He learned how to place a cornerstone so that summer noon would throw a blade of shadow precisely along a line the gods demanded. He learned something else too, though no lecture framed it: a tenderness for the fragile. In the faces of workers at the foot of the ziggurat, in the shoulders of fishermen hauling wet nets at dawn, he saw the cost of grandeur. The gods did not disdain humanity. They simply paced at a scale that turned human suffering into background noise. The young steward-to-be never forgot the sound of that noise. It would echo in him when the sky began to tilt. Across the seas, the pattern repeated with local dialects. Temples rose where the coast curved like a crescent, and where mountains shouldered snow into the sun. Geometry stitched continents that had never met, as if a single hand, working the loom of the world, preferred the same knots everywhere. Oral tales from far coasts kept odd correspondences with the hymns of the river cities. Myths, shaped like riddles, shared bones with the doctrines etched in clay. The grand design was not clandestine. It was simply too large and too patient to be seen in a single lifetime. That was the Anunnaki genius. Systems that outlasted storytellers. Yet even perfect systems must negotiate with the wild. Every few generations, a season would stumble out of step, a drought would linger, a flood would sprint ahead of schedule. The gods corrected by building redundancies, granaries sized for famine, canals with overflow beds, rituals of contrition sized for panic. But on the highest terraces, where night seemed deeper and stars sharper, the astronomer priests began to notice a drift. Patterns that should have returned with comforting precision came back wearing a slight difference, a degree off, an hour late, a whisper of misalignment that set teeth on edge. The tablets gave it a name that means simply the error. It did not dominate the night. It threaded through it, a quiet misprint setting line after line just slightly askew. Most shrugged. The young steward did not. In this golden age, confidence swelled like the river in spring, and the Anunnaki let it. They built higher, plotted grander, coordinated sanctuaries across distances that tested the limits of pack animals and sailcloth. The system absorbed discomfort as a great beast absorbs gnats. From the ground, the world looked immortal. From the balconies, the horizon looked honest. From the archives, the cycles looked patient. Only from the crosshairs where stone met star did anxiety sharpen. The last king was forged at those crosshairs, tempered by the friction between inevitability and correction. He would rise, and when he did, he would inherit an empire of measures built atop a planet of moods. Because beneath the polished calendar, beneath the hymn that kept perfect time, the error thickened into a pattern pointing toward a convergence 13,000 years in the making, a convergence that no ceremony could delay and no law could repeal. And that convergence, when it arrived, would reveal what the age of the gods could not admit, that even the architects of order build on a world that occasionally remembers its wild heart. What approached would test the lattice, measure the measures, and ask the last king to choose between preserving a system and saving the lives it was built to serve. What approached, unseen but inevitable, would change everything. The last king of the sky. In the chronicles buried beneath the ruins of Eridu, a name once shimmered in gold leaf. The name of a ruler said to have walked between the mortal and the divine. Time erased it, leaving only a fragment, a single symbol resembling a wing spread open toward the dawn. Archaeologists debated whether it was a sign for king, heir, or memory. Yet those who read deeper into the silence believed it meant something else, the bridge. For in that age of alignment and decline, there rose one who stood between heaven's order and the chaos of earth, the last Anunnaki king, born of celestial blood but bound to clay. He was unlike his predecessors, whose rule had been mathematical, detached, and absolute. From his earliest days, he lingered not in the towers, but among the canals. He listened to the murmuring of workers, the rhythm of the water wheels, the pulse of life in the soil. To him, the empire was not only geometry, it was heartbeat, fragility, song. His tutors called him distracted. The priests whispered that he was dangerous. The gods, it was said, watched him with unease, for he questioned the pattern of their perfection. Legends claim his eyes bore the reflection of the heavens, twin spheres of pale light that shimmered with starfire at dusk. When he walked through the temples, even the most devout priests felt a chill. They said he carried the echo of storms that had not yet arrived. He was the last of his kind to be born under the constellation of the Archer, the sign the Anunnaki believed governed both creation and destruction. That mark would define his reign, for it was destined to aim toward something the gods had long forbidden: truth beyond obedience. The archives speak of his coronation, a ceremony that lasted 3 days and 3 nights. On the first night, the astronomers aligned the sacred fires to the pulse of Sirius, the dog star, said to be the doorway of the gods. On the second, the high priest invoked the bloodlines of Anu, Enlil, and Enki, proclaiming that their power now flowed through the veins of the king. And on the third, as dawn broke red over the ziggurat, the king took an oath no other ruler had ever spoken aloud. "May I reign in truth, even if it ends the reign of the gods." The words silenced the assembly. Some believed it a metaphor. Others recognized rebellion. The skies, they said, thundered in distant reply. In his early reign, he continued the traditions of those before him, maintaining temples, overseeing irrigation, balancing tribute between city and shrine. Yet his heart drifted elsewhere. At night, he climbed to the highest platform of the ziggurat to watch the stars shift, marking the slow drift of constellations against the horizon. It was then that he began to notice what the astronomer priests had feared to admit. The error had deepened. The heavens were not where they should have been. A subtle tilt, a precession too rapid, a light too bright in the eastern sky. Something immense was approaching, something beyond prediction. Rather than conceal it, the king ordered new observations. Night after night, his scholars recorded the aberrations, the growing brightness of a red star near the edge of the heavens, the strange tremors beneath the western plains, the unseasonal withering of crops. The priests warned him not to question the divine order. "The heavens correct themselves," they said. "The gods are the balance." But the king saw a pattern the priests refused to see, a rhythm of destruction and renewal woven into every epoch of earth. He realized that his people, like the civilizations before them, were standing at the edge of a cycle that no divinity could stop. It was in that revelation that his rule changed. He decreed that the archives of every city should be copied and sealed in vaults of stone. He ordered his scholars to create star maps not for worship, but for survival, to mark where the stars would be when the world began again. He commanded the builders to raise new sanctuaries, not only as temples, but as shelters, vast chambers deep beneath the ziggurats, lined with clay tablets, metals, and seeds. Some called them chambers of eternity. Others called them tombs of pride. But the king believed he was preserving memory itself. Still, the gods grew restless. The old pantheon, led by Enlil, saw in his actions a challenge to their authority. He builds as if he were one of us, they said. He guards against fate as if fate were his servant. When omens began to darken, floods in the south, fires in the west, and stars flickering where none should, the priests proclaimed divine anger. Yet the king remained calm. If the gods wish to erase us, he told his council, then let us leave behind something they cannot erase, the truth of what we were. His words spread across the empire, carried by scribes and masons, whispering through the streets. Hope and fear walked side by side. The people began to look to the sky not for blessing, but for warning. Some believed the king could defy the coming storm. Others feared he had summoned it. In the 6th year of his reign, a comet appeared, vast, red, and haloed with fire. The same omen that the priests of Eridu had once called the final star. The same light that would later be recorded as Nibiru, the wanderer of destruction. For 40 days it burned above the world, growing larger each night, until even at noon it could be seen faintly against the sun. The king watched in silence. His advisors begged him to perform the ancient rites, to kneel before the altars and plead for mercy. But he refused. The gods have written this in the fabric of time, he said. No prayer can rewrite the stars. Then, without warning, the rains began. They were unlike any storm before, endless, cold, and heavy with silt. The rivers overflowed, swallowing the fields, dragging temples into their depths. The tremors deepened, and the earth cracked open in molten veins. The king sent his people to the shelters, ordered the sealing of the archives, and climbed once more to the top of his ziggurat. The chronicles end there, not in despair, but in defiance. He watched the heavens, reads the final line, and the heavens watched him. The cataclysm that followed would erase his cities, his people, and even the memory of his reign. But fragments survived, scattered across continents, encoded in myth, waiting to be reassembled. They whisper of a time when a king of heaven tried to save the earth, and of a truth buried beneath the weight of 13,000 years of forgetting. And if the last king's warning was true, then the cycle that ended his world may one day begin again. But to uncover that truth, we must journey deeper, to the place where the sands hide the forbidden archives of Eridu, because what lay beneath that temple could unravel everything we think we know about our origin. The forbidden archives of Eridu. They say the oldest city in the world was not built for the living, but for memory. Eridu, the city of the deep. Its ruins now lie beneath layers of salt and clay near the ancient delta of the Persian Gulf, where shifting sands and forgotten floods have buried millennia of history. To archaeologists, it is a cradle of civilization. To those who listen to older whispers, it is something far more, the first city of the gods. Beneath its crumbled ziggurat, under slabs that no tool has yet dared to lift, the last Anunnaki king was said to have sealed the truth of his world, a truth so dangerous that even the gods tried to erase it. In the 20th century, when modern excavations reached the lower strata of Eridu, They found structures far older than the Sumerians. Beneath the visible city were foundations cut into bedrock, vitrified stone with magnetic signatures impossible to explain. Beneath those, another level entirely, chambers carved with precision beyond the tools of the age. The deeper they dug, the stranger it became. Walls fused by extreme heat, ceilings arched with alloys that did not rust, fragments of cuneiform written in an unknown dialect. The excavation halted without explanation. Officially, the site was too unstable. Unofficially, the whispers began. Someone had found something that should have remained buried. Ancient records describe those same chambers, the halls of Enki, where the god of wisdom and water stored the blueprints of creation. The legends said they contained tablets of Me, the laws of civilization, and the map of the stars as the gods saw them. When the flood came, those who entered the halls did not return. The priests said the knowledge was forbidden, meant only for the divine. But the last king, defiant until the end, had entered anyway. He sought not immortality, but remembrance. He believed that truth was not blasphemy, it was survival. The tablets he sealed there have never been found, yet fragments echo across history. In 1929, a German team unearthed a black tablet, coated in obsidian glaze, inscribed with symbols unlike any known script. It was immediately confiscated, shipped to Berlin, and then vanished during the chaos of war. Photographs, however, survived. Linguists identified mathematical ratios embedded within the text: 3.2.1, 5.813, numbers corresponding not to trade or calendar, but to orbital cycles of planets. Whoever wrote it had mapped the sky with precision that should have been impossible 13,000 years ago. The fragment became known among researchers as the Codex of the Deep. To most historians, it was dismissed as an elaborate forgery, but to those who compared it with the myth of Eridu, the correlations were unmistakable. The Codex described a celestial convergence, an alignment of Earth, Venus, and a red wanderer whose passage triggered floods and magnetic storms. It matched the event the king had foreseen. The catastrophe that ended his reign was not divine wrath, it was cosmic inevitability. And yet the question remains, who first built those archives? Were they truly the work of the last king, or were they remnants of something even older, a civilization before Sumer, before written time? The deeper layers beneath Eridu suggest multiple epochs of construction, each rebuilt upon the ruins of the last. Some walls show erosion from salt water, suggesting that the city stood before the Persian Gulf filled with sea. Geological surveys place that shoreline over 12,000 years ago, aligning precisely with the end of the last ice age and the meltwater pulse that flooded the world. Could the cataclysm that drowned early Eridu be the same one recorded in the flood myths of every ancient culture? If so, then the Forbidden Archives are not merely historical, they are evidence of a cycle of destruction that humanity has endured before. The last king, aware of this pattern, sought to preserve what his ancestors had once failed to keep. He built upon their ruins as they had built upon others, each layer a message, each age a whisper to the next. Inside those chambers, legend says, was a sphere of crystal set into the floor, an artifact the priest called the Eye of Enki. It was said to glow when the heavens shifted, pulsing with the rhythm of the approaching red star. Some believed it was a relic of the gods, a device that stored knowledge in light. Others said it was the heart of the planet itself, encased by the Anunnaki to monitor the cycles of time. When the flood came, the eye dimmed, its light fading as if the earth itself had fallen asleep. Modern explorers who claim to have entered the ruins of Eridu, though their accounts are denied by official records, speak of corridors that hum with static, of patterns etched into stone that resemble circuit boards, of an underground resonance that distorts compasses and watches. Some even claim that deep beneath the site lies a massive sealed door of black stone, smooth as glass, bearing no handle, no hinge, no mark of erosion. Local folklore calls it the Gate of the Sky King. If that gate exists, it might lead to what the last king wanted the future to find, a message meant for those who would one day awaken beneath another age of convergence. For in his final years, before the deluge, the king commanded that his knowledge be encoded in geometry, in the spacing of temples, in the orientation of ziggurats, in the ratio of their stairways to the horizon. He believed that when the cycle returned, the pattern would call out to us again, and perhaps it already has. Across the world, megalithic sites separated by oceans mirror the same alignments found in Eridu, to Orion's belt, to Sirius, to the Pleiades. From Giza to Teotihuacan, from Stonehenge to Göbekli Tepe, the pattern repeats. How could cultures separated by continents and millennia share the same celestial signature? Either coincidence or continuity. The forbidden archives, whether myth or reality, represent the seed of that continuity, a reminder that what was once forgotten still breathes beneath our feet. The last king did not simply perish, he became the guardian of memory itself. And perhaps the greatest secret buried in Eridu is not the story of the gods, but of us, that humanity was never the beginning, but the continuation of something ancient, waiting to remember itself. But as the last king sealed the gates beneath his city, the heavens above him began to stir. The red wanderer brightened, the poles trembled, and the oceans whispered their revolt. The great alignment was beginning, and what happened when that alignment reached its peak would bring the world to its knees. The great alignment. The Earth has always kept time with the stars. Every tilt of its axis, every wobble of its poles, every breath of its magnetic heart follows a pattern as old as the solar wind itself. But once every few ages, the rhythm breaks, the heavens shift, the invisible machinery grinds, and the great clock resets. The ancients called this moment the Great Alignment, the meeting of worlds, when the orbits of Earth, Venus, Mars, and the Red Wanderer formed a line so precise that even the gods held their breath. To modern astronomy, it might sound poetic. To the world of the last Anunnaki king, it was prophecy fulfilled. For generations, the astronomer priests of Eridu had recorded the slow drift of the constellations, their movements etched in tablets of fired clay. They saw the sky not as infinite, but as cyclical, an immense wheel turning through epochs of creation and destruction. They called its spokes ages, each governed by a constellation, each lasting 12 or 13,000 years. The king's era stood at the edge of one such wheel, and as the stars moved into unfamiliar positions, the high priests grew uneasy. The heavens were falling out of rhythm. One by one, the omens appeared. The polar lights began to shimmer at unnatural latitudes. The magnetite in the temple's foundations pulsed faintly, disrupting compasses made of polished hematite. The rivers swelled months before the rains. Birds migrated in confusion, flying east instead of south. And above them all, the red star burned, a crimson ember that refused to move with the rest of the night sky. The king called it the Eye of Return. The priests called it the Judgment Flame. The people simply called it the Star that does not sleep. In the city squares, astronomers erected mirrors of polished copper to track its motion. Each night they measured its position, comparing the results with tablets centuries old. The difference grew daily, a drift no longer explainable by known cycles. It was as though space itself were bending. Some scholars speculated that the red star was not a star at all, but a planet on a long elliptical orbit, returning to the inner solar system after ages in the cold. Others whispered that it was an intruder, a celestial body that passed through the system in intervals, dragging chaos in its wake. The priests forbade such talk. The king, however, demanded truth, no matter the cost. He ordered the construction of the Temple of Convergence atop the highest plateau of the realm. Its stairways ascended not toward worship, but toward observation. Its alignment was flawless. Every corner pointed to a cardinal star. Every stone cast a shadow at noon that traced the orbit of the Red Wanderer. Within its chamber of polished basalt, the king gathered the greatest minds of his age. There, surrounded by tablets and the hum of vibrating metals, they mapped the heavens in real time. For months, the results came back the same, the orbits of the planets bending subtly toward a single point. They could calculate the exact date when the alignment would be complete, the day when the red star, the sun, and the earth would line up perfectly. On that day, they predicted, tides would surge, the sky would ignite with aurorae, and the Earth's magnetosphere would shudder. But the calculations also revealed something else, a pulse, a resonance deep within the Earth itself, as though the planet were preparing to shift. The king understood. The great alignment was not merely celestial, it was planetary. Legends claim he entered a trance that night, walking barefoot into the courtyard as lightning veined the horizon. The red star blazed above him, larger now than ever before. The chroniclers wrote that he raised his hands and whispered, "The wheel turns once more." Whether that was myth or memory, the events that followed would echo through every culture on Earth. Across the known world, the signs intensified. Volcanic ash darkened the skies of the far north. Strange lights rippled over the equatorial seas. The moon's reflection wavered, distorted by tidal anomalies that stretched coastlines like fabric. And then came the sound, a low global hum, felt more than heard, resonating through stone and bone alike. The alignment had begun. At first the changes seemed miraculous. The crops, previously withered, flourished as if charged with new energy. The air grew thick but rich, electric with ozone. But as the alignment peaked, the harmony shifted into violence. Tides surged inland, swallowing harbors. Earthquakes rippled outward from deep faults, as if the planet's core were twisting. In Eridu, towers cracked, and the Temple of Convergence trembled. The priests declared it divine punishment. The king, standing atop his ziggurat, saw something different, the fulfillment of the cosmic cycle his ancestors had always feared. He sent messengers to the outer cities, ordering the evacuation of the plains and the sealing of the underground archives. Few obeyed. The people had never known an age without the gods. They could not believe that the same heavens that once blessed them would now destroy them. When the rains began, they called it purification. When the horizon burned red at midnight, they called it a test. But by the time the seas began to boil, language itself failed. According to surviving texts, the last observation was recorded in the king's own hand. It reads, "The sun has dimmed, though no cloud covers it. The sea climbs the land. The red star divides as if birthing another. The sky falls northward. The air shakes." Scholars who have analyzed the geometry of those words note that the spacing of the symbols matches the pattern of electromagnetic pulses produced by solar storms. It is as if the king had described not metaphor, but physics. And then silence. The alignment reached its apex. In that instant, the world of the Anunnaki vanished beneath a cascade of elements, fire, wind, and endless water. The flood that followed would bury cities, erase archives, and carve new coastlines where deserts now lie. The gods themselves, if they were gods, departed or perished, and only the memory of that day remained, carried through the myths of every surviving culture as the Great Flood, the day the sky fell, the purification of the earth. For 13,000 years that memory slept, until modern science began to rediscover what the ancients already knew, that our planet's history is punctuated by cataclysms, cycles of destruction and renewal that align uncannily with the turning of the stars. The Great Alignment was not the end of a mythic world. It was a reset of a system. And as strange lights now appear once more in our skies, as the poles wander and magnetic fields weaken, some dare to wonder, has the wheel begun to turn again? Because if it has, then the warnings of the last king were never myth at all. But the story of how his people faced that final hour, and the discoveries buried beneath the ziggurat after the storm, will take us deeper still, into the whispers beneath the stone. Because beneath the ruins, something still remembers. Whispers beneath the ziggurat. Beneath the scorched plain where Eridu once shimmered, the earth still breathes. To the untrained eye, the ruins are silent, a wasteland of broken brick, eroded steps, and the bones of a forgotten empire. But those who have stood in the heart of that silence swear they hear something beneath it, a vibration, low and steady, like the heartbeat of the planet itself. Locals call it the murmur of the deep. Archaeologists call it seismic resonance. But to those who know the old stories, the stories of the last Anunnaki king, it is the whisper of the ziggurat, remembering what it once guarded. When the great alignment ended and the world drowned, the ziggurat of Eridu did not fall completely. Its summit collapsed, but its foundations remained, encased in layers of sediment that preserved the chambers below. Millennia later, when the floodwaters receded and new civilizations rose, Eridu became a myth. The Sumerians spoke of it as the first city, founded by gods before the flood. They built over it, then over that, layering time like sediment. By the time of Abraham, the original ziggurat was buried beneath 60 feet of clay. Modern explorers, however, uncovered more than ruins. In the early 1900s, British teams led by Leonard Woolley excavated the site, believing they had found the flood layer described in the Epic of Gilgamesh, a stratum of clean clay, 4 meters thick, separating two civilizations. Woolley's team reported something extraordinary. The clay contained no signs of human life, as if the land had been wiped clean. Beneath that sterile layer lay a city built with advanced planning, polished stones, and unfamiliar tools. The official report described it as pre-Sumerian. The unofficial notes, later leaked by a member of the team, used another term, non-human. For decades, access to the lower chambers was restricted. The records vanish abruptly in 1939, just as global conflict began. When excavation resumed in the 1950s, entire sections of the lower site were found filled with concrete, sealed by authorities without explanation. Only one surviving photograph remains, a blurred image showing a wall of fused stone, etched with spiral grooves that seem to pulse outward from a central point. Some researchers who analyzed the image claim the grooves match the Fibonacci sequence, the mathematical pattern found in seashells, galaxies, and DNA. It is as if the architecture itself was built to echo life. But the strangest discoveries came not from archaeologists, but from those who disobeyed them. In the 1980s, local diggers claimed to have found a narrow shaft leading beneath the sealed chambers. They followed it down into a space unlike anything above, a smooth tunnel lined with obsidian, faintly luminous under torchlight. At the end of the passage, they reported finding a round chamber filled with a fine metallic dust. At its center stood a single object, a block of translucent crystal, pulsing with pale light. The men fled, terrified. Within a week, the shaft was sealed by military authorities, and those who spoke publicly were never heard from again. Whether the story was myth or memory, it reignited old speculation. Had the last king succeeded in preserving something beneath his city, not just tablets or relics, but technology? The Sumerian word mi, often translated as law or divine decree, also means essence, formula, or blueprint. Could these have been devices, not metaphors, repositories of encoded knowledge? Ancient texts describe the Mi as radiant stones containing the secrets of kingship, architecture, and cosmic order. Some scholars quietly suggest they were crystalline data stores, built by beings whose science we now call myth. Deep scans of the Eridu region conducted in the early 2000s revealed magnetic anomalies consistent with hollow chambers extending far beneath the known ruins. These anomalies align precisely with the cardinal directions of the ziggurat's foundation, as though the builders designed the entire structure around whatever lies below, yet no excavation permit has been granted since. The site remains closed, guarded under the pretext of environmental preservation. Officially, nothing of importance lies beneath. Unofficially, satellite imagery shows faint heat signatures beneath the sand, warm where the earth should be cold. If the last king truly sealed his legacy beneath Eridu, it may still be active. The myths describe the Vault of Anu, a chamber where sound and light became one, where the sky and the earth spoke the same language. Priests once believed that only during certain alignments could the vault be opened, when the stars above mirrored the architecture below. Some fringe theorists suggest that such moments correspond to geomagnetic resonances, when the Earth's energy peaks and dormant systems awaken. They believe the next resonance is approaching, that the vault may stir again, as it did when the Great Alignment first began. It's easy to dismiss such claims as fantasy, yet time and again, Eridu refuses to stay buried. Drones surveying the site in 2017 recorded unexplained electrical interference over a circular depression near the ziggurat's base. Instruments failed, compasses spun. Later analysis showed a pulse repeating every 11 minutes, a rhythm identical to the Schumann resonance, the electromagnetic heartbeat of the planet. Could the whispers beneath the ziggurat be not myth, but the Earth itself resonating with an ancient machine? If so, then the last king's warning was not written only in clay. It was encoded in vibration, waiting for us to listen. Perhaps he understood that memory alone could not survive 13,000 years, but frequency could. The stones of Eridu may hum because they remember. And if they remember, what are they trying to say? Are they warning us that the cycle is returning? Or are they calling us, inviting us to awaken the vault once more? Whatever the truth, the whispers beneath the ziggurat are growing louder. Scientists detect magnetic surges across the Mesopotamian plains. Satellite data reveals fluctuations that mirror those preceding ancient floods. The resonance is returning. The alignment is reforming. And somewhere in that silence, beneath the dust and the weight of forgotten time, the legacy of the last king waits, patient, pulsing, alive. But to understand what that legacy means, we must look beyond Eridu, to the survivors of the deluge, and to the scattered memory they carried into the mountains after the world ended. Because from those survivors, civilization would be born again. The flood that rewrote time. When the sky finally broke, it did not fall as rain, it fell as vengeance. The chronicles of the Great Flood, found in fragments across every continent, speak with one voice. A deluge that swallowed mountains, a tide that erased memory, and a silence that followed so vast that even the stars seemed dimmed by it. But the truth, buried beneath the myth, is more complex and far more terrifying. The flood that ended the reign of the last Anunnaki king was not simply water. It was time itself, resetting. It began with thunder that had no source. The air thickened with electricity. Clouds spiraled in impossible patterns, glowing from within as if lit by veins of molten gold. Lightning struck without pause for days, and the rivers, swollen from months of strange tides, surged inland like predators. In Eridu, walls of water rose higher than the ziggurat steps, carrying trees, beasts, and men into the churning dark. Witnesses wrote of the sea devouring the horizon, of the earth opening like a mouth. To them, it was divine judgment. But to the king, watching from the tower that bore his name, it was the fulfillment of celestial law. As the flood tore through the plains, the sky turned red. The red star, the eye of return, burned brighter than ever, haloed by a vast ring of fire. Later generations would call it Nibiru. Astronomers today might call it a fragmenting comet or a rogue planetary body. Whatever it was, it passed close enough to Earth to twist the magnetic field, to pull the oceans into frenzy, and to tilt the planet's axis. The world changed orientation. North became not where it had been, and the seasons began anew. The deluge was not punishment. It was a planetary convulsion, the violent rebalancing of a world realigning itself to survive. In that chaos, cities vanished. The shining temples of Kish, Uruk, and Larsa swallowed. The mountain sanctuaries of the north broken like sandcastles. The king's last act, recorded on the fragments found near Ur, was to send 7 vessels to the mountains carrying the archives of knowledge. seeds, metals, and tablets inscribed with the measure of the heavens. These would become the myths of survival repeated in every culture: Ziusudra, Utnapishtim, Noah, Manu. Different names, one story, a remnant chosen not by gods, but by foresight. When the rain stopped, it did not end. For days, the world remained gray and steaming, the sun a dull orb behind clouds of ash. Mountains that once stood above the plains were now islands. The survivors, those who had reached the highlands, looked down upon an ocean that stretched where continents had been. Everything was changed. The rivers had new courses. The constellations above no longer matched the carvings of their ancestors. The sky itself was reborn. For centuries afterward, people would try to measure time again, but it would never align. Calendars failed. The seasons drifted. What had once been precise became uncertain. It was as though history itself had been washed away and rewritten. The flood did not just destroy civilizations, it reset chronology. The Earth's tilt, rotation, and orbital distance had subtly changed. The sun rose in a new place, and with that single shift, all memory, all records, became unreliable. Archaeologists have long noticed a global break around 2800 BCE, a sudden, mysterious collapse followed by the rise of agriculture and city building within a few thousand years. Science calls it the end of the Younger Dryas, a sudden warming triggered by unknown forces. Ancient myth calls it the age when the gods departed and humanity began again. But perhaps they are the same event, seen through different eyes. Imagine the survivors, descendants of the last king's people, standing among the peaks of the Zagros Mountains, clutching clay tablets and memory. They knew the stars had shifted, but the pattern of the old world remained within them. They began to rebuild, not as gods, but as witnesses. They taught the next generation fragments of lost knowledge, how to shape bricks, how to chart the heavens, how to mark solstices. To those who came after, they appeared as divine, the seven sages, the shining ones, the people of the sky. In truth, they were refugees of a world erased. From those highlands, civilization would begin again. The floodwaters receded, revealing valleys rich with new silt. The descendants of the survivors moved down into these plains, carrying with them legends of a shining kingdom that had fallen into the sea. They built new temples upon the ruins, imitating what they half remembered. They called them ziggurats, pyramids, and observatories, echoes of something far older. But even as they rebuilt, the world was not as it had been. The magnetic field weakened. Strange auroras haunted the sky for centuries. Animals vanished. Forests grew where deserts once lay, and deserts spread where rivers once flowed. It was a new Earth, younger, rawer, and more unstable. The survivors told their children that time itself had split, that the old world lay on the other side of the waters, unreachable. And so they began to measure again. Days, moons, years, lifetimes, the birth of history. What they could not have known is that some of what had been buried beneath the mud still lived. Deep within the sealed chambers of Eridu, the relics of the last king's archive survived the deluge. Protected by stone and geometry, they waited in silence. And perhaps, when the survivors looked up at the changing stars, they could faintly feel it, the hum of memory beneath their feet, whispering to the future. The flood had rewritten time, but not erased it. Memory has a strange way of surviving catastrophe. It lingers in myth, in symbol, in geometry, in the stories that refuse to die. Every civilization that followed, Sumer, Egypt, Maya, Inca, carried echoes of that single night when the world ended and began again. They all told of gods descending from the sky, of a flood sent to cleanse, of knowledge preserved in sacred vaults. They were not repeating legends. they were remembering fragments. The flood that rewrote time was both an ending and a beginning. The Anunnaki were gone, but their design endured. In the DNA of civilization itself, humanity had become the new vessel of their legacy. The last king's wish had been fulfilled. We remembered, even without knowing what we remembered. But buried within that memory, encoded in myth and symbol, lies a darker truth that the cycle will return. The same alignment that drowned the first world will one day return to test the next. And perhaps, just as the last king foresaw it, so too must we. For the survivors did not escape the flood, they carried its shadow forward, and in their attempt to rebuild, they awakened something that had not died, something that watched from the edges of their new dawn. Because when the waters withdrew, not everything that rose from the depths was human. The survivors of the deluge. When the waters withdrew, silence took its place. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of shock. The earth, cleansed and wounded, steamed beneath a sun that looked unfamiliar, as if the heavens themselves had been rearranged. Mountains glistened with new rivers. Valleys where empires once stood were now seabeds littered with bones. Across this altered world, only fragments of life remained. Scattered groups clinging to the highlands, shivering beneath skies that no longer matched their ancestors' constellations. These were the survivors of the deluge, the inheritors of a memory that would define the next age. They came from many lands, shepherds from the Zagros Mountains, seafarers stranded on the peaks of what had once been islands, and remnants of the Anunnaki's chosen, hybrids of heaven and earth. To them, the flood had not only destroyed their world, it had stripped the gods of their omnipotence. The sky had fallen, the earth had rebelled, and even the divine had bled. Yet among the survivors were those who carried something priceless: knowledge. The tablets sealed by the last king had not all been lost. Several of the 7 vessels sent out before the flood had reached their destinations, carried by winds, waves, and chance. One was said to have come to rest in the mountains of Armenia, another in the highlands of Persia. A third, legends claim, drifted westward to the lands beyond the sunset. Each contained fragments of the ancient sciences: geometry, astronomy, metallurgy, medicine, and something deeper: the laws of balance between heaven and earth. These were not relics of worship, but tools for rebuilding. The survivors who found them became teachers. In time, these wandering keepers of the old knowledge came to be known by many names. The Sumerians called them the Apkallu, the 7 sages, who emerged after the flood to restore order. The Egyptians called them the followers of Thoth, bearers of the words of the gods. The Greeks remembered them as the Titans, punished for giving fire to man. In every story, the pattern repeats: a world destroyed, a remnant preserved, a handful of luminous beings descending from the mountains to teach the art of civilization once more. But who were they truly? Were they survivors of the Anunnaki bloodline, the hybrid children of the gods, or merely humans who inherited their legacy? Ancient texts hint at both. The first kings of the post-flood world were said to be of mixed seed, capable of living far longer than ordinary men, possessing eyes that shone in darkness and voices that resonated like thunder. These beings did not claim divinity, they carried responsibility. Their mission was to rebuild what had been lost, but without the arrogance that had summoned destruction. Yet the memory of the gods' power lingered. The survivors began to divide. Some clung to the old ways, building temples to the vanished deities and demanding obedience to forgotten names. Others followed the teachings of the sages, building with balance, measuring by the stars, seeking harmony rather than dominion. This rift would shape the destiny of every civilization to come. One path led to enlightenment, the other back toward tyranny. The seeds of both were sown in the same flood-scarred soil. Archaeological evidence hints at their presence. Around 9500 BCE, new settlements appeared across the Near East. Jericho, Çatalhöyük, and the mysterious Göbekli Tepe. Each emerged fully formed, as though knowledge had returned overnight. The architecture of these sites shows astronomical precision, impossible for cultures supposedly just learning to farm. Göbekli Tepe's pillars align with the constellation of Orion, the same celestial triad that governed Eridu's ziggurat. Coincidence or continuity? The survivors, it seems, were rebuilding not by invention, but by memory. In the myths of every culture, the survivors carry the same message. We have seen the world destroyed, and we will not let it happen again. The Mayans spoke of it in the Popol Vuh, gods remaking men from maize after the flood of mud. The Hebrews encoded it as the covenant of the rainbow, a promise between heaven and earth. The Egyptians carved it into stone as the Zep Tepi, the first time, when the gods returned to raise the land from the waters. All tellings are one memory retold through different tongues, the moment humanity began again under the shadow of remembrance. But survival came with a cost. The bloodlines of the old world carried more than wisdom. They carried guilt. The last king's descendants, if indeed he left any, became both revered and feared. They possessed strength and knowledge beyond ordinary humans, but they were reminders of the arrogance that had brought ruin. Over centuries, their kind would diminish, their lives shortened, their light dimmed, until they were no longer seen as divine, but as myths. Yet their influence endured. Wherever a civilization arose with sudden sophistication, with architecture aligned to the stars, mathematics without origin, and myths of gods descending from the heavens, the echo of those survivors can be heard. Perhaps this was the last king's plan all along, to scatter his knowledge across the world so that no single empire could repeat the mistakes of Eridu. He knew that memory concentrated in one place becomes dangerous. Dispersed, it becomes wisdom. That wisdom, diluted but persistent, would form the foundation of all to come. The geometry of pyramids, the rhythm of calendars, the architecture of time itself. And yet, not all of the survivors kept faith with his vision. Some, intoxicated by their inherited power, sought to restore the dominion of the gods. They taught their followers not balance, but control, that humanity's destiny was to rule as the gods once did. These would become the priest kings, the architects of hierarchy, the builders of empires. The same knowledge that could heal and harmonize could also enslave. As the centuries passed, the divide between the faithful and the fallen widened. The sages withdrew into secrecy, forming hidden enclaves in the mountains and deserts, preserving the remnants of the king's archives. The priest kings, meanwhile, raised monuments to themselves, rewriting history to place their bloodline on divine thrones. Humanity had survived the flood, but it was already repeating the old cycle: enlightenment followed by pride, pride followed by downfall. Still, the survivors carried within them a single thread of hope, that one day, when the stars realigned and the cycle began anew, their descendants would remember the lessons of the last king, that when the red star returned, humanity would stand not in fear, but in understanding, because the flood was not the end. It was the beginning of memory, and memory, once awakened, never dies. But what of those bloodlines, the descendants of the sky kings who walked among men after the flood? What became of them, and what power still lingers in their veins? For to follow the survivor's trail is to uncover the secret lineage that connects the divine past to the human present, and that lineage is where the story turns next. The bloodline of the Sky King. After the waters receded and the survivors scattered, a quiet lineage began to thread its way through the centuries, invisible yet ever present, whispered of in temples, encoded in genealogies, and hidden behind crowns. It was said that the last Anunnaki king left no throne, but he left heirs, not kings in the old sense, not gods commanding storms, but carriers of memory, vessels of the old blood, diluted through generations, yet never entirely lost. They would walk among men as teachers, rulers, prophets, and wanderers. Some would remember their heritage, most would not. But in moments of great change, when the stars began to move in familiar patterns, the bloodline would stir again. In the earliest generations after the flood, that legacy was both blessing and burden. Those born with traces of the old blood were different. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dark. Their minds moved faster than their peers. Some could sense the magnetic hum of storms before they came. Others could hear the resonance of stone. The people called them the Bright Ones, or the Sons of the Deep. The priesthood, fearing their influence, declared them sacred but dangerous, intermediaries between heaven and earth, to be honored but never fully trusted. Thus began the long exile of the bloodline, revered in public, watched in secret, erased in record. The first of these heirs to emerge as a leader after the flood was known in Sumerian fragments as Alulim, the one who arises. He was said to have ruled for 28,000 years, clearly symbolic, yet perhaps encoding a memory of a long-lived being or a dynasty that carried a single name through generations. Alulim's reign marks the dawn of recorded kingship in the Sumerian king list, a text scholars still struggle to reconcile with history. It begins not with human rulers, but with beings whose reigns spanned tens of thousands of years, ending abruptly with the flood. Afterward, the durations shrink dramatically. The implication is clear. Longevity declined with each generation. The divine blood was fading, yet traces of that lineage surface everywhere. In Egypt, the earliest pharaohs claimed descent from the Shemsu Hor, the followers of Horus, luminous beings who ruled before the first dynasty. In the Indus Valley, the Rig Veda speaks of the Devas who mixed with mortals, producing kings who remembered the songs of the stars. In South America, the Inca told of Viracocha, a bearded god who walked out of the floodwaters to teach men architecture and law, fathering a race of sun-born rulers. Each of these lineages begins with a visitor, part god, part man, who appears in the aftermath of Cataclysm to rebuild civilization. Coincidence or convergence? The bloodline carried not only memory, but also mission. The last king's decree, preserved in fragments, commanded his heirs to bear the fire of the sky within clay, to keep alive the knowledge that heaven and earth were one system, that what happens in the stars echoes below. This principle became the core of the world's sacred sciences: astrology, geometry, music, and number. Wherever the bloodline went, temples aligned with the heavens appeared. Stone circles rose to track solstices. Pyramids mirrored constellations. The old knowledge persisted, encoded not as theology, but as architecture. But as centuries turned into millennia, the purity of that mission eroded. Power draws imitation, and imitation draws corruption. Kings began to claim divine descent not to preserve wisdom, but to legitimize conquest. The sacred covenant between heaven and earth became propaganda. Bloodlines that had once been chosen for their humility became obsessed with dominance. The children of the Sky Kings forgot the lesson of their ancestor, that knowledge is meant to serve life, not rule it. Still, among them there were exceptions, guardians who kept faith with the original oath. In the shadow of empires, they formed secret schools devoted to remembering what the temples had forgotten. They taught their students to read the stars not for prophecy, but for pattern, to listen to the resonance of stone, to feel the cycles of the earth as echoes of a greater rhythm. These hidden descendants became the architects of knowledge behind history's turning points, the inventors, sages, and mystics who seemed centuries ahead of their time. Pythagoras, Imhotep, Thales, and even the mythic Hermes Trismegistus, all linked by a thread of teaching that traces back in some way to the world before the flood. DNA, too, may whisper of their survival. Studies of ancient remains from Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Anatolia reveal mysterious genetic markers, haplogroups that appear suddenly, then vanish, only to reappear thousands of miles away in later civilizations. Some geneticists speculate that these markers originated from an unknown population that emerged abruptly around 10,000 BCE, just after the Younger Dryas. To science, they are an anomaly. To the story of the last king, they are a signature. The bloodline's influence can even be measured in myth. The serpent that encircles the world, the feathered dragon, the winged disc, all symbols of transformation and renewal, all associated with wisdom descending from the sky. Across cultures, the symbol reappears where the bloodline took root, as if its bearers marked their presence not through conquest, but through resonance, a reminder that their knowledge was cyclical, not linear, eternal, not temporal. But the lineage was not immortal. As the ages passed, the blood diluted further, its gifts dimmed. The world of men grew louder, the heavens quieter. By the time history entered the era we call recorded, the descendants of the Sky Kings had become mere mortals, their divine heritage forgotten, their ancient mission obscured by dogma. Yet every so often, a spark returned, a ruler, a thinker, a seer whose vision seemed out of time. Akhenaten in Egypt, obsessed with a single sun god. Quetzalcoatl in Mesoamerica, a bringer of light who forbade sacrifice. Gilgamesh in Uruk, seeking immortality through wisdom, each perhaps unknowingly echoing the will of the last Anunnaki king, to remember. And so, the bloodline endured, not as a dynasty, but as a frequency, passing invisibly from generation to generation, calling out to those attuned to its resonance. When the cycle turns, it awakens. When the heavens shift, it remembers. And now, as the stars realign and the earth trembles once more, that ancient memory may be stirring again, calling its heirs to awaken to their forgotten duty, to preserve balance before another flood, this time of fire, not water. For the story of the bloodline is not a myth of ancestry. It is a warning of responsibility. Those who carry even a trace of that old light must decide what to do with it. Will they repeat the arrogance of their forebears, or fulfill the promise of their king? Because somewhere in that lineage, hidden beneath the names and crowns of history, lies the key to humanity's next beginning. And that key, a single artifact said to have survived every cataclysm, lies waiting in the dust of forgotten chambers, etched with a geometry older than language itself. It is called the Hidden Codex, and it changes everything. The Hidden Codex. It begins as a rumor, whispered among scholars, dismissed by institutions, and buried beneath the polite silence of archaeology. A story of an object that should not exist. They call it the Hidden Codex, a relic said to predate writing itself, containing the last king's record of the Cataclysm and the map of what would come after. To most, it is legend, an echo of the same myth that haunts the ruins of Eridu. Yet fragments of its existence persist, scattered through private collections, museum basements, and forbidden archives, each piece carrying the unmistakable signature of impossible time. The first whisper came from the deserts of southern Iraq in 1929, when a team excavating near the ancient site of Eridu uncovered a block of obsidian no larger than a human chest. Its surface was perfectly smooth, yet under light it revealed lines so fine they could not have been carved by hand. A lattice of spirals, ratios, and constellations etched with microscopic precision. When examined under magnification, the lines formed not symbols, but frequencies, patterns of vibration. The artifact emitted a faint hum, as though resonating with the earth itself. For 3 days it was studied. On the 4th, it disappeared. The official report lists it as lost to accident. The locals called it the book that sings. Decades later, a photograph surfaced among the personal papers of an Austrian archaeologist. It showed the same black slab resting on a table, surrounded by measuring instruments. In the upper corner, a pattern resembling cuneiform glimmered faintly. Experts who analyzed the image noted something extraordinary. The inscriptions were not engraved into the surface, but suspended beneath it, as though the material itself held memories of light. If genuine, it was not a tablet. It was a recording device. Myths from multiple cultures speak of such an object. The Sumerians wrote of the tablets of destiny, which governed the order of the cosmos. The Egyptians spoke of the emerald tablets, given by Thoth to preserve the wisdom of Atlantis. The Hebrews described the Ark of the Covenant, containing sacred laws written by divine fire. The Hindus tell of the Sintamani stone, a luminous relic that grants insight into the mechanisms of creation. Different names, one idea, a record of divine knowledge preserved across resets of civilization. Could these all be cultural memories of the same artifact? The hidden codex of the last king? Those who believe in its existence point to a strange consistency among these myths. The codex is always described as indestructible, self-luminous, and responsive to sound. Ancient hymns describe priests chanting specific tones to awaken the stone. Modern physicists, analyzing resonance frequencies in crystalline materials, note that quartz and obsidian can store and emit measurable vibrations when struck by sound. In other words, the singing stone might not be poetic metaphor, it might be technology. One translation of a damaged cuneiform text found near Ur speaks directly to this. The king took the heart of the star and placed it beneath the mountain. He said, "When the heavens turn once more, let this voice be heard again, so that the children of clay remember the covenant of the sky, the heart of the star, the voice of remembrance." These are the same phrases found in later Egyptian and Mayan texts describing a sacred object hidden after the flood, awaiting rediscovery in a future age. In 1963, a secretive expedition reportedly ventured into the marshes near Eridu under the sponsorship of an unnamed foundation. Only one member returned, a geologist named Anton Weiss. His notes, published posthumously, describe finding a black chamber lined with metallic dust and a stone slab vibrating faintly in sympathy with the air. He claimed that when light from his lantern struck the surface, images appeared, not carvings, but moving patterns of stars. It was as if the night sky itself was remembering, he wrote. Within weeks, he vanished from his hospital room in Munich. The notes were confiscated by intelligence agencies. Skeptics dismiss Weiss's account as delusion, yet his description of the pattern, a series of concentric spirals surrounding 3 central points, matches the exact orbital configuration of Earth, Venus, and Mars during the Great Alignment 13,000 years ago. Coincidence, or the record of an event remembered in myth? If the codex truly exists, its purpose is clear: to preserve the blueprint of civilization through catastrophe. But why hide it? Why bury it beneath Eridu, beneath the mud and salt of a world that would forget it? Perhaps the king understood that knowledge is dangerous in unbalanced hands. The same geometry that could align the stars could also summon destruction. The codex was not meant to grant power. It was meant to awaken memory when the time was right, when humanity could understand without repeating the past. Modern attempts to find it have failed, though not for lack of trying. Remote sensors detect magnetic irregularities beneath the Eridu region, but excavation is forbidden. Independent researchers claim that portions of the codex may have already surfaced, fragments reappearing in disparate places. In 2001, a small obsidian tablet was recovered from the seabed near the coast of Oman, bearing inscriptions identical to those of the lost artifact. Its current whereabouts are unknown, and yet there are those who say the codex never left our reach, that it is not a physical tablet at all, but something encoded within the human genome, a resonant frequency passed through generations, awakening when the stars realign. The last king's true archive, they claim, was not stone or metal, but life itself. Each human heartbeat, Each dream, each act of creation echoes that original memory, the song of survival encoded in flesh. If that is true, then the hidden codex does not need to be found. It needs to be remembered. Its symbols live in the spiral of DNA, in the ratios of music, in the architecture of the heart. It speaks through pattern, not language, through resonance, not sound. Still, one question remains unanswered. If the codex carries the blueprint of civilization, could it also carry the warning of its next fall? Did the last king encode not only knowledge, but prophecy, a record of the next alignment, the next flood, the next cleansing of the world? Perhaps that is why the whispers beneath the ziggurat are growing stronger. The codex may be stirring, responding to the same celestial pulse that once awakened it before. And if it does awaken, it will not do so quietly. It will call once more to its creators, the gods of the sky, the watchers of the deep, because hidden within the codex, it is said, lies the shadow of their return, the shadow of Nibiru. For centuries after the flood, the skies of the New World were calm, as though the heavens themselves were holding their breath. But to those who carried fragments of the old knowledge, that silence was not peace. It was anticipation. The survivors had seen the Red Wanderer once before, the celestial intruder whose passing had shattered the balance of the earth. They knew it would return. And so, across temples and mountain observatories, in scripts both sacred and forbidden, they recorded its name. Nibiru, the planet of crossing, the wanderer of judgment, the shadow of the gods. To the ancients, Nibiru was not myth, it was memory. In the Sumerian tablets, it is described as the seat of the heavenly king, a world that appears only when the ways of heaven align with the ways of earth. The last Anunnaki king had watched it rise during his final days, its crimson halo growing as the oceans rose. He understood that it was no ordinary planet. It was a messenger of cycles, the signal of renewal and destruction. After the flood, his descendants preserved the warning. When the red star returns to the house of the sun, the age of men shall tremble. For modern science, Nibiru remains a ghost, a hypothetical world beyond Neptune, a mathematical shadow known as Planet 9. Its existence has not been confirmed, yet evidence accumulates. Distant celestial bodies in the Kuiper belt move in patterns that suggest the gravitational pull of a massive unseen object. Astronomers describe it as a planet 10 times the size of Earth, orbiting so far away that it completes a revolution only once every 12,000 to 15,000 years. That number, impossibly precise, mirrors the ancient timeline of the Great Alignment, 13,000 years ago. Coincidence or continuity? In the mythic astronomy of the Anunnaki, Nibiru was not merely a planet. It was a gate. When it approached, the magnetic field of the Earth would resonate with its passing, triggering upheavals, geological, biological, and spiritual. The last king believed that these cycles were not punishments, but resets, opportunities for creation to renew itself. Yet he also knew that civilizations built on arrogance would not survive them. That is why he sealed the codex, why he warned his heirs, why he encoded memory in myth. He understood that Nibiru would return, and that the outcome would depend on what humanity remembered. The Egyptians preserved this warning under another name, the Eye of Ra, a fiery sphere that appears in the heavens to cleanse the earth. The Maya called it Bolon Yokte, the Lord of the 9 strides, whose return marks the end of an age. The Hopi speak of the Red Kachina, the purifier who dances in the sky before the world's renewal. The same story in different tongues, a celestial wanderer whose reappearance divides epochs. Modern astronomers dismiss these as coincidence, but even they now admit the possibility of an unseen gravitational force beyond the outer planets, shaping our system in ways we barely understand. Yet the ancients did not merely fear Nibiru, they revered it. They believed it was the home of the great architects, the Anunnaki themselves, and that each of its returns corresponded with their interventions on Earth. The alignment 13,000 years ago brought flood and fire, but also the spark of rebirth. Could its next return bring not destruction, but awakening? The Last King's teachings suggest both outcomes are possible. The red star does not choose, one fragment reads. It reveals. That phrase, it reveals, has haunted researchers for decades. What does it mean? Perhaps the passage of Nibiru triggers not only physical changes, but consciousness itself. The same electromagnetic forces that tilt the poles could alter the resonance of the human mind, awakening dormant memory, the codex within. This theory, long dismissed as mysticism, gains strange support from modern data. During solar storms and geomagnetic fluctuations, the human brain's alpha waves shift. Schumann resonances, the Earth's natural heartbeat, synchronize with our own neural rhythms. If the Last King understood this, he may have seen the cycles of Nibiru not as apocalypse, but as opportunity, a moment when the veil between worlds thins and the collective memory of humanity reawakens. Across the ancient world, monuments seem built to watch for its return. The pyramids of Giza, oriented with near-perfect precision to Orion's belt, encode not only stellar coordinates, but orbital timescales matching the great year, the 26,000-year precession of the equinoxes, half of which aligns with the cycle of Nibiru. In Mesoamerica, the Temple of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza records a similar rhythm, counting down to the red dawn. Even Stonehenge, often dismissed as a simple calendar, measures alignments that repeat every 12 millennia, as if all the world's sacred sites are synchronized to the same celestial clock, the one that began ticking when the Last King sealed his archive. But if the return of Nibiru is inevitable, then the question becomes, when? Astronomers estimate that the mysterious planet 9 could be nearing its perihelion, the closest point to the Sun, sometime within the next century. Ancient prophecy places it sooner, describing a period when the sky's heart turns red and the world forgets its seasons. Already the poles drift, magnetic fields weaken, and strange auroras shimmer at unexpected latitudes. Climate shifts accelerate beyond prediction. To some, these are the first whispers of Nibiru's shadow, the subtle herald of a greater approach. Skeptics argue that fear of Nibiru is superstition, yet myths that persist for tens of thousands of years rarely do so by accident. They survive because they encode something: data, memory, warning. The Last King's world perished when it ignored those warnings, mistaking signs for coincidence. We stand at the edge of a similar ignorance, repeating the cycle he tried to break. If the Red Wanderer returns within our lifetime, it will not announce itself as fire in the sky, at least not at first. It will begin as a whisper in the magnetic field, a tremor in the ionosphere, a change in the rhythm of time itself. Machines will fail, memory will flicker, the earth will hum louder than ever before. The hidden codex will awaken, not as artifact, but as resonance. And those who remember the story of the Last King will know what it means. Because Nibiru's shadow does not bring death, it brings choice, to forget and fall again, or to remember and rise. And those who understand that choice will face their greatest trial in the next age of secrecy, when the knowledge of the gods becomes forbidden once more. Because after the shadow comes the silence. Forbidden knowledge. After the shadow came silence. It did not descend in a single day, but crept over centuries, a slow erasure disguised as progress. The flood had cleansed the world, the Red Wanderer had passed, and the survivors had rebuilt their cities. Yet with each generation, the memory of what truly happened dimmed. What had once been knowledge became myth. What had once been warning became doctrine. And the few who still remembered the truth of the Last King, the cycle of Nibiru, the archives beneath Eridu, the codex encoded in stone, became the first heretics of the New World. At first, their teachings were tolerated. The sages who emerged after the flood were revered as teachers, keepers of the sacred sciences. They taught the new rulers how to measure the heavens, how to align temples to the solstice, how to keep calendars that mirrored the breath of the earth. But as power consolidated, that reverence turned to fear. The new priest kings, descendants of those who had survived the Cataclysm, realized that knowledge was the only true throne. To control the heavens, they had to control memory, and so they declared, "Some truths are not meant for men." This decree spread across continents. The archives of the old world were hidden or destroyed. The ancient star maps of Sumer vanished into sealed chambers. In Egypt, the priesthood of Heliopolis forbade access to the books of Thoth, texts said to describe the mechanisms of the universe. In the Indus Valley, the knowledge of the Vimana, flying chariots of the gods, was rewritten as allegory. In the Americas, temples once used for observation became altars of sacrifice. Everywhere, science and spirit were separated by decree, ensuring that mankind would remember only fragments, safe, incomplete, and controllable, but not all obeyed. In the mountains, deserts, and hidden valleys, enclaves of initiates preserved the forbidden wisdom. They were called by many names: the Watchers, the Architects, the Keepers of the Flame. Their purpose was not to rule, but to remember. They carried the geometry of Eridu in song and symbol, in the ratio of temples and the cadence of chants. To the uninitiated, these were rituals. To the initiated, they were equations. The harmony between heaven and earth was not worship, it was engineering. From these secret orders would later arise the mystery schools of Egypt, the brotherhoods of Babylon, and the hidden academies of Greece. Their adepts studied the same truths once guarded by the last Anunnaki King: that the universe is not chaos but resonance, that life is frequency, and that civilizations rise and fall according to the rhythm of the stars. They understood what the priesthood had buried, that the flood was not divine punishment, but cosmic law. The cycle would return, as surely as the seasons. The task was not to stop it, but to prepare. Over time, fragments of their knowledge leaked into legend. Pythagoras spoke of the music of the spheres, echoing the Anunnaki's belief that sound binds the cosmos. Plato's story of Atlantis, a civilization destroyed by hubris and flood, mirrors the fall of Eridu. The Hermetic maxim, "As above, so below," is a direct translation of the last king's creed, that the heavens and the earth are mirrors of the same truth. Each of these philosophies was a spark from the same buried flame, yet each was branded heresy in its time. The suppression grew systematic. In Mesopotamia, libraries that hinted at pre-flood history were sealed. In Egypt, the reign of Akhenaten, who tried to restore the single solar truth of the gods, was erased. In Greece, the Pythagorean schools were burned. Later, during the rise of empires, temples were converted, scrolls burned, teachers silenced. By the dawn of the modern age, the ancient connection between cosmos and consciousness had been severed completely. Humanity had become deaf to the hum of the earth. But the forbidden knowledge never truly vanished. It hid in symbols: the winged disk, the serpent, the pyramid, the compass and square, emblems that survived across millennia, migrating through cultures, waiting to be decoded. To the untrained eye, they were decorations. To the initiated, they were blueprints of the universe, the ratios of the codex, the pulse of the great alignment, the memory of the last king. Each generation of seekers rediscovered fragments of the pattern and rebuilt what had been lost. The alchemists of the Middle Ages, the astronomers of the Renaissance, the physicists of the 20th century. They all reached toward the same realization, that matter and mind, energy and memory, are one continuum. And yet, with every rediscovery came suppression. The pattern repeated itself like a cosmic heartbeat. Every time humanity drew too close to the truth, chaos followed. Wars, collapses, resets. Some believe this is coincidence. Others suspect the cycle itself enforces forgetfulness, as though the universe guards its secrets through entropy. But perhaps the real reason is simpler. Those who control knowledge fear its power. The priests of old have become the institutions of today, and the forbidden knowledge remains forbidden, not because it is false, but because it is too true. What if the last king foresaw even this? What if he knew that every age would bury its own memory, and that only through forgetting could the next age rediscover it freely? In that case, the suppression was not tragedy, but design, a way for truth to protect itself until humanity matured enough to wield it wisely. Yet time grows short. The signs that heralded the great alignment are reappearing. The shifting poles, the trembling magnetosphere, the awakening resonance beneath ancient sites. The forbidden knowledge, long dormant, is stirring again. It whispers through scientific discovery, through quantum entanglement and frequency research, through the growing intuition that consciousness shapes reality. The same realization that guided the last king is returning to us, disguised as modern science, yet ancient as creation itself. And if that is true, then the keepers of the old flame will rise again. They will gather at the ancient centers, Egypt, Sumer, Peru, the Himalayas, following the alignments their ancestors once charted, not to summon gods, but to remember who we are, descendants of the stars, heirs to a covenant written in vibration and stone. But there is one place where the forbidden knowledge was never fully silenced, where architecture still sings the language of the gods. The stone temples aligned with Orion, where light and shadow reveal the secret geometry of eternity. To understand what the last king's legacy became, we must journey there, to the lands of the pyramids and the temples that echo his memory. Because in Egypt, the shadow of Eridu still breathes. The star temples, across the shifting sands of Egypt, where the desert meets the dawn, stone still sings to the stars. The ancients called this place Tameri, the beloved land, but to those who inherited the whispers of Eridu, it was something far older, the mirror of heaven, the earthly reflection of the gods' own domain. Here, the knowledge that survived the flood found new form in stone, encoded not in words, but in geometry. Every pillar, every angle, every shadow of these temples spoke the same language the last Anunnaki king had once sealed beneath his ziggurat, the language of the sky. The survivors who crossed the seas after the deluge carried with them fragments of the old world's wisdom, the proportions of the sacred triangle, the measure of the earth's curvature, the music of the spheres. In Egypt, these became architecture. The first builders, long before the dynasties of Menes and Narmer, aligned their sanctuaries not for decoration, but for resonance. The temples at Abydos, Dendera, and Heliopolis were not houses of worship. They were instruments. The air within their chambers vibrated at specific frequencies when struck by voice or drum. Their corridors channeled sound the way copper channels current. The ancients were not praying. They were tuning the earth. At the heart of this symphony stood the pyramids, the great lenses of stone that captured heaven's music and reflected it upon the land. The Great Pyramid at Giza, though younger in construction, is built upon a foundation whose plan predates its builders by millennia. It is aligned true north with an accuracy modern engineers struggle to match. Its base encodes the circumference of the earth, its height, the ratio of the golden mean. But most revealing of all are its stellar alignments. The southern shaft of the king's chamber points directly to Orion's belt, the same constellation that governed Eridu's ziggurat and the temples of Sumer. The builders were not Egyptian, they were heirs. Legends within the temple of Edfu speak of a first time, a golden age when the gods walked the earth and raised the islands of flame, sanctuaries that anchored heaven's order after the world was flooded. The priests of Edfu called these the star temples, each dedicated to a region of the sky. There were 7 in all, corresponding to the 7 sages who survived the deluge. The texts describe how these temples were placed upon the bones of the earth, points of geomagnetic power where the planet's life force breathes. To modern science, these are telluric currents. To the ancients, they were the veins of the divine. Inscriptions hint that the builders of the star temples came from a land submerged in the western waters. They brought with them sacred stones that shone by night and tools that cut without hand. The details are mythic, yet they echo the technology of the Anunnaki: resonant tools, light-borne metals, and levitation through sound. Could these have been the survivors of the last king's bloodline, fulfilling his decree to seed knowledge across the new world? If so, then Egypt was their masterpiece, a beacon designed not for power, but for remembrance. Modern researchers have begun to rediscover what the ancients already knew. These structures are not inert. The stones of Giza vibrate. Measurements taken within the Great Pyramid reveal resonance frequencies that match the harmonic vibrations of the Earth's crust. Sound within the king's chamber amplifies itself, sustaining tones as if the pyramid were alive. When lightning strikes nearby, electromagnetic pulses course through its inner chambers, creating currents that hum like a heartbeat. This is not coincidence, it is design. The star temples were built to synchronize the planet's frequency with that of the heavens, to maintain the balance the last king swore to protect. And perhaps that balance is the true meaning of Ma'at, the Egyptian concept of divine order. Ma'at was not law or morality. It was resonance, the harmony between cosmic and earthly vibration. Pharaohs ruled in Ma'at when their temples were aligned to the stars, when their actions echoed the rhythm of creation. To rule outside of Ma'at was to invite chaos, the same chaos that once drowned the world. Yet even here, in this sanctuary of continuity, corruption crept in. The star temples became monuments to kings instead of harmony. The priesthood, inheriting fragments of the codex but not its wisdom, turned resonance into ritual. Sound became chant. Geometry became superstition. The meaning endured only in symbol. By the time of the later dynasties, the true purpose of the temples had been forgotten. Only the masons, the silent builders, remembered their secret, that every stone is a frequency frozen in time. Still, the architecture did not forget. When sunlight strikes the temple of Abu Simbel on the same day each year, illuminating the inner sanctum at dawn, it replays a cosmic alignment older than Egypt itself. When the stars of Orion rise directly over Giza, the pyramids mirror their positions with perfect precision. The land speaks to the sky, as it did in Eridu. The legacy of the last king lives on in stone. But there is another mystery hidden among the alignments. When all 7 star temples are plotted on a global map, from Giza to Abydos, from Dendera to Edfu, they form a line that extends westward across the sea, intersecting the ruins of ancient sites in the Andes and beyond. It is as if the builders followed a single geodesic, a path encircling the Earth, marking points of energy in perfect proportion. Could this be the planetary map encoded in the hidden codex, a design for rebalancing the Earth after the flood? If so, then the star temples are not merely remnants of a lost civilization. They are components of a global instrument, a resonant grid meant to stabilize the planet during celestial shifts. And perhaps that is why these temples still hum, why lightning favors their peaks, why compasses spin near their foundations. They are not ruins, they are dormant. And if the signs of the great alignment are returning, the pole drift, the solar storms, the trembling of the Earth, then the star temples may soon awaken, resonating once more as they did in the first age. When that happens, the geometry of heaven will again descend upon the Earth, and the memory of the last king's covenant will rise in light and sound. But the Egyptians were not the only heirs of this architecture. Far across the ocean, in another world entirely, a new civilization mirrored their work, aligning their own temples to the same stars, encoding the same prophecies. Their land was called Maya, and their purpose was to remember what Egypt was forbidden to say aloud, that the cycle will return, and with it, the gods of the sky. Echoes in Egypt. The desert does not keep secrets. it whispers them. In the thin breath of dawn, when the wind moves over the pyramids like a sigh, the stones of Egypt seem to murmur a language older than kings. But that same language, astonishingly, also speaks thousands of miles away, in the jungles of Mesoamerica, in the Andes, in the ruins of civilizations that were never supposed to have met. Across oceans and ages, their temples share the same geometry, the same celestial alignments, the same memory of gods who came from the sky and vanished in flood and fire. It is as if the earth itself remembers the plan of the last king and repeats it wherever humanity is ready to listen. The Egyptians called their cosmic architects the Shemsu Hor, the followers of Horus, luminous beings who survived the flood and rebuilt the order of heaven on earth. The Maya spoke of the Itza, who arrived after the waters receded, bringing with them the knowledge of time and stars. Both claimed descent from beings who measured the heavens with the precision of gods and taught mankind to build as the sky builds, with rhythm and proportion. The echo between their myths is unmistakable. Both peoples built temples that mirror Orion's belt. Both encoded the precession of the equinoxes, a 26,000-year cycle, in their calendars. And both foretold that when the red star returned, the age would end and begin again. Coincidence, the scholars say. But coincidence does not build two civilizations on opposite sides of the planet using the same stellar blueprint. Coincidence does not carve identical symbols, serpents of light descending stairways, in both Dendera and Chichen Itza. Coincidence does not explain why both cultures preserved the image of the winged disk, the same emblem that once adorned the gates of Eridu. The evidence whispers a deeper story, that these civilizations were twin echoes of one forgotten source, fragments of a single project begun before the flood. At Giza, 3 pyramids mirror the 3 stars of Orion. At Teotihuacan, 3 temples do the same. Both align to the belt of the celestial hunter, the same constellation revered by the Sumerians as the dwelling of the gods. The name Orion itself derives from the Sumerian Uru-Ana, the light of heaven. To the Maya, these stars were the hearthstones of creation. To the Egyptians, they were the gate of Osiris, the god who died and rose again. In both myths, the same message repeats. Death is not the end. It is a cycle, the sky's memory of itself. Archaeologists studying the Maya pyramids have found that their builders understood the same ratios encoded in Giza. The base-to-height proportion of the Pyramid of Kukulkan matches that of the Great Pyramid within a fraction of a percent. Both encode the value of pi, both reflect the golden mean, and both align to solstices with an accuracy that defies the tools of their eras. It is as though both were tuned to the same celestial instrument, the one described in the hidden codex, the instrument that harmonized the earth with the heavens. In the Temple of Dendera, Egypt, a relief depicts the zodiac in full, a wheel of stars divided into 12 ages. At its center burns a disk encircled by serpents, the sign of Nibiru, the wandering planet. On the opposite side of the world, in the Dresden Codex of the Maya, a red serpent coils around a glyph of the sun, its tail marked by the number 13. Scholars say it represents Venus, yet the ancient priests called it the star that returns after the age of floods. The correspondence is exact. The Egyptians and the Maya remembered the same celestial visitor, the same cataclysmic rhythm. What connects them is not migration, but mission. The descendants of the last king scattered across the reborn world to ensure that no single empire could hoard the knowledge again. Each lineage received a piece of the map. The Egyptians, the geometry of the stars; the Maya, the mathematics of time; the Andean builders, the memory of resonance and stone. Together, they formed a global network, a planetary archive disguised as faith. To the uninitiated, they were temples. To those who knew, they were memory engines, keeping the Earth's song alive until humanity was ready to remember. There are clues that these civilizations communicated across impossible distances. The chemical composition of certain Andean artifacts matches Egyptian alloys. Carvings in Palenque show figures wearing headdresses identical to those of Abydos, and both cultures spoke of beings with elongated skulls and eyes like polished obsidian, the watchers who guided their kings. These were not mere legends. They were the last reflections of the Anunnaki bloodline, echoing through continents that modern history insists were isolated. But the most striking evidence lies in the numbers. The Maya long count calendar ends its great cycle at 13 Baktuns, 5,125 years, precisely 1/5 of the 26,000-year precessional cycle encoded in Egypt's zodiac. It is a fraction, a harmonic. The Maya counted time in resonance, not linearity. They were measuring the same cosmic heartbeat that began in Eridu. When the calendar reset in 2012, many awaited apocalypse. None realized that the true meaning was awakening, the first tremor of memory returning to consciousness. The red star had not yet appeared, but the frequency had begun to shift. In both Egypt and Mesoamerica, prophecy speaks of a return, of gods descending once more on pillars of fire when the heavens align. These are not omens of invasion, they are metaphors of remembrance. The gods that will return are not beings from the sky, but the memories of who we were, the resonance of the last king, rising again through us. When the cycle completes, humanity will face the same choice the king faced, to wield knowledge as dominion or as harmony. Even now, the echoes continue. Modern researchers mapping global electromagnetic fields find that the major ancient temples, Giza, Teotihuacan, Tiwanaku, Angkor, Easter Island, all lie along specific nodes of resonance. The pattern forms a geometric lattice wrapping the Earth, precisely matching the alignments described in the star temples of Egypt. It is as though the ancient builders created a network to stabilize the planet's field, a planetary nervous system connecting every sacred site, humming quietly beneath the surface. When lightning strikes Giza, instruments as far away as Peru register the pulse. When solar storms flare, the same frequencies recorded within the Great Pyramid appear in the temples of Central America. The planet remembers itself through its architecture. The network is awake, and within that network, the resonance grows stronger each year. The hum beneath Eridu, the magnetic anomaly beneath Giza, the tremor beneath the Andes, they are converging. The cycle is turning again, and the temples of the earth are preparing to sing once more. But the ancients knew this moment would come. That is why they left one final code, a measure of time hidden within the architecture of Egypt and the calendars of the Maya. Together they form a countdown to the next alignment, the one the last king foresaw but never lived to see. That countdown ends soon, and when it does, the sky itself may reopen, revealing not gods descending, but the truth of what they were, because the next age will not be ruled by memory. It will be ruled by revelation. The Sumerian timekeepers. Long before the first calendars carved time into years, the Sumerians already measured eternity. They were not the first civilization, only the first to remember that civilization is cyclical. Their clay tablets, worn and fractured, are not primitive musings of farmers or kings. They are clocks, devices of memory built from mathematics and myth. And at the center of their system stood a secret known only to the priest astronomers of Eridu, the knowledge of the great cycle, the same cosmic rhythm that governed the rise and fall of worlds. They were the timekeepers of the gods, and their task was not to predict the future, but to remember the past that would return. The Sumerians measured time in units of 60, a system still echoing through our minutes and hours. To them, 60 was not arbitrary. It was sacred, the frequency of balance between heaven and earth. 60 divided the circle, 60 divided the heavens. The number was the key to resonance, the pulse of the earth's rotation, and the measure of celestial alignment. Every temple, every city, every ritual calendar followed this harmonic structure, mirroring the architecture of the cosmos itself. Even the orbits of the planets, when converted into their system, fell neatly into multiples of 60. To modern science, it is coincidence. To the timekeepers, it was confirmation that the universe was a song, and their duty was to keep it in tune. Their oldest surviving record, the Mul-Apen tablets, is a catalog of stars so accurate that it matches modern astronomy within a fraction of a degree. But hidden among its listings are anomalies, stars that do not exist today, constellations that seem misplaced. Some scholars attribute this to error. Others suggest a more chilling possibility, that the tablets record the sky as it appeared before the Earth's axis shifted, before the flood. If true, the Mul-Apen is not simply an astronomical text. It is evidence of planetary memory. The Sumerians were not mapping the heavens of their time. They were preserving the heavens of a vanished world. The priests of Nippur, successors to the Watchers of Eridu, believed that time itself was a living being, a serpent devouring its own tail. They called it Ouroboros, the endless cycle. Every 12,960 years, half the great year of precession, the serpent bit its tail, and the world began anew. Their records mark these intervals with symbols of fire and flood, corresponding exactly to the cataclysms we now recognize in geological history. The melting of the Ice Age, the volcanic winter of 536 CE, and the countless lesser upheavals that reset civilization. They did not merely observe these patterns, they prepared for them. Each temple served as a chronometer, measuring not just the passage of days, but the heartbeat of the planet. Their knowledge was inherited, not invented. The timekeepers claimed descent from Anu's scribes, the celestial accountants of the gods. They wrote that the last king before the deluge commanded them to bind time to clay so that even when memory failed, the measure of the heavens would endure. In their vaults, they kept what they called the tablets of the numbered days, records of every cycle of conjunction between the sun, moon, and the red wanderer. Only fragments survive, but one passage endures. When the red star returns to its gate, the count shall reset, and the earth shall tremble as before. But those who remember the measure will stand beyond the flood. For millennia, their work continued in silence. As empires rose and fell, their successors became the Chaldeans, the Magi, the astrologers of Babylon. They guarded the secret that time was not linear, that history was an echo of celestial geometry. They taught that every kingdom, every belief system, every discovery would repeat in resonance with the cycles of the stars. The invention of writing, the rise of kings, the building of towers, the fall of cities, all reflections of earlier epochs. To them, prophecy was not foresight, it was remembrance. In the ruins of Sippar, archaeologists found an artifact that may prove how deep this understanding went. A clay tablet depicting a solar system with 10 bodies, including one beyond Pluto's orbit. It is a perfect representation of what we now call Planet 9, drawn thousands of years before telescopes. The tablet's title translates as "The Star of Crossing Approaches." How could they have known? Unless, of course, they were not predicting, but recording. The shadow of Nibiru, the planet of the gods, had been seen before, and the timekeepers remembered. Their system of reckoning became the foundation of every future calendar. The Egyptian solar year, the Mayan long count, the zodiac of Greece and Babylon, all trace their proportions to the Sumerian scale. Even our modern measurement of 360 degrees in a circle echoes their cosmic order. A reflection of the 360,000 years they believed composed a full reign of the gods before the cycle reset. Every culture that adopted their timekeeping inherited, unknowingly, the pulse of the last king's world. But beneath the numbers lies something deeper, a philosophy of responsibility. The timekeepers taught that each cycle offers humanity a choice, to evolve in harmony with the heavens or to repeat the same destruction. The flood was not destiny, it was consequence. When the measure is forgotten, one tablet warns, the balance is lost, and the serpent strikes again. For the timekeepers, ignorance was the true apocalypse, the forgetting of alignment. Modern physicists, studying the precession of the equinoxes and the oscillation of the magnetic poles, now confirm what the Sumerians encoded in myth, that the Earth's rhythm is not constant, that its balance shifts in cycles measurable in tens of millennia. These are the same cycles that govern ice ages, climate shifts, and magnetic reversals. The difference is that the Sumerians understood them as moral as well as physical, reflections of consciousness itself. When humanity lives out of harmony, the planet mirrors that disharmony. The flood, then, was both natural and spiritual, the Earth resetting its own equilibrium. It is said that in the deepest chamber beneath Eridu, a clock still ticks, not mechanical, but harmonic, tuned to the Schumann resonance of the Earth. When the frequency reaches its ancient threshold, the cycle will complete, and the world will face its next recalibration. Some believe this clock is metaphor. Others think it is literal, a resonant device left by the last king, activated by the same cosmic geometry the timekeepers once measured. If so, then the hum now detected beneath ancient sites may not be coincidence. It may be the sound of that clock awakening. And if it is awakening, then the countdown has begun again, not to destruction, but to revelation. For the timekeepers did not fear the turning of the ages. They called it the return of balance. They believed that in this next cycle, humanity would no longer need gods to remember the measure. We would become the keepers of time ourselves. But before that awakening could occur, another convergence had to take place, a meeting of two lost lineages, two surviving branches of the same cosmic heritage, one from the east, born of the Sumerian plains, the other from the west, rising from the drowned memory of Atlantis. When those two streams met, a new synthesis was born, the greatest secret of all. It would be called the Atlantean Convergence. The Atlantean Convergence. Before there were nations, before there were names, there were two surviving memories of the world before the flood, two branches of one lost civilization, separated by ocean and myth, yet guided by the same invisible rhythm. One lineage came from the east, carrying the tablets and star maps of the Sumerians, the heirs of Eridu, guardians of the measure of time. The other came from the west, from a land drowned beneath the waves, remembered only as Atlantis. When those two streams of memory met, the forgotten and the forbidden became one again. This meeting, whispered in legend, encoded in temple design, and buried beneath millennia of revision, is known as the Atlantean Convergence. To the untrained eye, Atlantis is myth, a moral parable written by Plato about pride and punishment. Yet his dialogues hint at something far more precise: coordinates, cycles, measurements, and technologies beyond his time. In a single day and night of misfortune, he wrote, the island of Atlantis disappeared into the sea, but he also records that the Atlanteans had colonized lands across the world before their fall, Egypt among them. If that is true, then Egypt was not the cradle of civilization. It was its heir, the star temples, the geometry of Ma'at, the resonance of Giza. All may have originated from the teachings of a drowned continent. Ancient texts across cultures echo this same memory. The Maya spoke of Aztlan, the land beyond the waters. The Celts sang of Avalon, the isle that vanished in mist. The Egyptians wrote of Zep Tepi, the first time, when gods rose from the western sea to rebuild the world. Even in Sumer, a single tablet mentions a realm beyond the bitter river, ruled by beings who came from the islands of flame. Each of these is a reflection of Atlantis, refracted through the lens of local memory. Different names, one origin, a civilization that mastered the resonance between heaven and earth and paid the price for misusing it. When the flood erased Atlantis, not all of its people perished. Some fled east, following the stars to the lands where the red sun rises. There they encountered the survivors of Eridu, the Sumerian lineages rebuilding along the new rivers of Mesopotamia. At first, they were strangers. the Atlanteans, keepers of energy and geometry, and the Sumerians, keepers of time and astronomy. But when they recognized the same sacred ratios in each other's teachings, the same geometry of pi, phi, and 60, they understood that their knowledge had once been one. They united, fusing the sciences of resonance and chronology into a single philosophy. That fusion would become the foundation of all future sacred architecture, from the pyramids to the cathedrals of Europe. The Atlanteans called their lost technology Maya-Kar, the power of the living stone. It was a science of harmonics, the ability to manipulate matter through vibration, to lift weight through sound. The Sumerians called it Mi, the divine decrees of balance. Together, they discovered that both terms described the same phenomenon, energy directed through resonance, the same force that sustains the movement of planets. To them, creation itself was frequency made visible. In the beginning was the Word, later scriptures would say, echoing this truth, that vibration precedes form. From their alliance arose new centers of knowledge. The earliest stood on the Nile, where Atlantean masons taught Sumerian priests how to bind geometry with light, giving birth to the first true pyramids. Another arose in the Andes, where the two traditions merged to construct the temples of Tiwanaku, built from stones cut so precisely they seem melted together. Across the globe, identical methods appeared, as though guided by a single hand. The Atlantean convergence was not an event. It was a renaissance, a brief resurgence of pre-flood science disguised as divine inspiration. Yet even this alliance was fragile. The same forces that had destroyed Atlantis, pride, secrecy, imbalance, began to infect the new world. Some of the Atlantean adepts believed humanity was not ready for full knowledge. They established mystery schools, teaching in symbols and riddles, restricting the deeper sciences to the initiated. The Sumerian line, guided by the humility of the last king's decree, opposed them. Knowledge must flow like water, one fragment reads. If you dam it, it will drown you. The disagreement split the alliance. The Atlanteans withdrew westward again, carrying their secrets to new lands, perhaps to the Americas, while the Sumerians remained, shaping the cradle of history. But before their parting, they left behind a testament, a message carved not in words, but in mathematics. Across Egypt, Sumer, and the Andes, a single number repeats 432. The Great Pyramid's base circumference equals 43 to 200 inches. The Sumerian king lists range some to multiples of 432,000. The Mayan calendar counts 432,000 days in its long cycle. Even modern science finds resonance in it. 432 hertz, the frequency some musicians claim aligns with the natural vibration of the universe. Coincidence? Or the signature of the Atlantean convergence, a harmonic key meant to unlock the memory of the unified knowledge? The deeper one looks, the clearer the pattern becomes. The Earth's precessional cycle, 25,920 years, divides evenly into 60x 432. The same number appears in myths of destruction and rebirth, from the Norse Ragnarok to Hindu cosmology. It is as though the builders of every age were trying to remind us of a single truth, that time itself is harmonic, and that civilization must tune itself to that rhythm or perish. The last king understood this. The timekeepers preserved it. The Atlanteans embodied it. Together they encoded the rhythm of eternity in stone so that even when memory failed, resonance would persist. Today, remnants of that unified knowledge survive in unexpected places, in the proportions of sacred art, in the ratios of musical scales, even in the DNA spiral's rotation. The same geometry that built the pyramids builds life itself. The Atlantean convergence was not merely historical, it was biological, a moment when cosmic harmony imprinted itself upon the living world. We are its echo, but every convergence carries its shadow. As the new civilizations grew, so did their hunger for control. The wisdom that once balanced heaven and earth became a tool of dominion. The resonance was no longer used to harmonize, but to harness. The Atlantean dream, began to fracture once more. The gods withdrew, the stars shifted, the knowledge sank again into secrecy, and so the world forgot until now. Because once every 13 millennia, when the red star returns and the Earth hums at a new frequency, the Atlantean code stirs again. The monuments awaken, the geometry reveals itself, and the descendants of both lineages feel the pull to remember. The convergence is not history repeating, it is history reuniting. And in our time, the convergence has already begun. The same patterns the ancients followed: magnetic drift, solar upheaval, the hum of the Earth rising from 7, 8 to over 12 hertz, all point to the same truth. The cycle is turning. The old resonance is returning. But to understand what this awakening truly means, we must turn to those who ensured that memory would not vanish, those who built not empires of stone, but empires of thought. They were called the architects of memory, and their work would decide whether the next convergence would bring enlightenment or another fall. The architects of memory. The Atlantean convergence had united the sciences of heaven and earth, but its harmony was brief. As civilizations rose again, each generation inherited fragments of that lost unity, scattering knowledge like seeds across the winds of time. Some were buried, others bloomed. Yet amid this vast forgetting, a few refused to let memory fade. They were not kings or priests, but something far rarer: builders of remembrance, guardians of pattern, keepers of the light within stone. History would forget their names, but their works would endure. They were the architects of memory. They understood that words decay, that empires collapse, and that language changes faster than the stars. So they did not write their messages in script or song. They encoded them in design, in proportions, alignments, and vibration. To them, architecture was not shelter. It was a form of communication. Each temple, each monument, each megalith was a syllable in the sentence of eternity. Together, they spoke a truth the last king had whispered before the flood: when language fails, geometry will remember. The first of these architects appeared in the shadow of the post-Atlantean world. In Mesopotamia, they built ziggurats that mirrored the heavens. In Egypt, they raised pyramids that captured the resonance of the earth. In Greece, they concealed sacred ratios within marble. And in lands across the sea, Peru, Mexico, Cambodia, they shaped mountains into memory. Their art transcended culture. The same numbers repeat in every epoch: 3, 6, 9, the vibrational code of energy itself. The great inventor Nikola Tesla would later rediscover this key, calling it the secret to the universe. The architects had known it millennia before. What they built was not static. The monuments respond to light, to sound, to time. The Great Pyramid's chambers amplify the frequency of 432 hertz, the same tone found in Sumerian chants and Gregorian hymns. The stones of Stonehenge resonate to 110 hertz, the frequency at which human consciousness enters trance. The temples of Angkor align with solar cycles that mirror the precession of the Milky Way. These are not coincidences. They are signatures. The architects encoded their understanding of consciousness into stone, ensuring that when humanity rediscovered resonance, the monuments would awaken to meet it. They worked in silence, often under the guise of ordinary masons, astronomers, or priests. They were called many names: the builders, the sons of the serpent, the children of light. In Egypt, they became the followers of Thoth, god of wisdom and architecture. In Mesopotamia, they were known as the Adapa, who taught mankind to build in the likeness of heaven. The Hebrews called them the Nephilim's descendants, giants of knowledge, not stature. To later generations, they became myth: Hermes Trismegistus, Enoch, the nameless adepts who built cities where energy and spirit intertwined. Their work carried a single purpose: to preserve the codex, not as an object, but as a system, a distributed archive of vibration hidden across the planet. Each sacred site was a node in a global network, resonating at a specific frequency. Together they formed what we might now call a planetary circuit. When tuned to harmony, when the alignments of the stars matched the geometry of the Earth, the network would hum in unison, reawakening the memory of the last age. The flood had erased history, but it could not erase pattern. The architects made sure of it. In later centuries, their legacy would evolve into the secret brotherhoods that shaped the course of human civilization. The builders of Gothic cathedrals, with their soaring vaults and sacred ratios, inherited the same geometry. The Masons, tracing their lineage to the temple builders of Solomon, carried echoes of the same creed. Even the great scientists of the Renaissance, Kepler, Newton, Da Vinci, were touched by that lineage, translating sacred proportion into mathematics and physics. Whether they knew it or not, they were continuing the architect's mission to weave cosmic order into human creation. But the architects also understood the danger. They knew that when knowledge becomes power, it invites corruption. Their geometry could heal or destroy, depending on the heart that wielded it. So they concealed the deeper formulas, encrypting them within allegory. The Vitruvian Man, Da Vinci's famous sketch of human proportion, is more than anatomy. It is the map of resonance, a diagram showing that the human body is tuned to the same ratios as the Earth and the cosmos. As above, so below, the Hermetic maxim declares. As within, so without. The architects lived by this law. To build in balance was to live in balance. In the 20th century, researchers began to rediscover what the architects had known intuitively, that geometry, sound, and consciousness are intertwined. Cymatics, the study of vibrations' effect on matter, reveals that sound creates shapes identical to those carved in ancient temples. When the right frequency is played through sand or water, it forms the flower of life, the same symbol etched into the walls of Abydos. The architects left proof not in myth, but in physics. We simply lack the ears to hear it. Their greatest work, however, remains invisible, the resonance grid that spans the planet. Lines of energy connecting sacred sites, Giza to Machu Picchu, Angkor to Easter Island, Stonehenge to Tikal, all share geometric relationships too precise to be random. Modern satellites have mapped these connections, calling them ley lines. The architects called them the veins of the Earth. They believed that through these channels, the planet breathes, exchanging energy between heaven and stone. When the great alignment returns, these veins will awaken, and the Earth will remember its own design. And perhaps that moment is near. The same frequencies that once activated the monuments are rising again. Schumann resonance, the Earth's natural vibration, has climbed dramatically over the past century. Geomagnetic fields fluctuate in rhythms matching those encoded in the pyramids. It is as if the architect's clock is beginning to tick once more, counting down to a convergence they foresaw. But what will awaken when the grid sings again? Will it heal as the last king intended, or will it judge as the priests once feared? The answer lies not in stone, but in us. The monuments are mirrors, waiting for humanity to resonate at their frequency, to remember that we too are architecture made flesh. For the architects did not build for gods. They built for the future, for us, believing that one day we would become what they were, keepers of memory, builders of harmony, witnesses to the next turning of the age. And that age, the one they called the Age of Revelation, is now upon us. Because the Earth's clock is moving once more and the stars are taking their positions. What the architects remembered, we are about to see. The return prophecy. They called it many names. The Red Dawn, the awakening of the Sky Lords, the Great Return. Across ages and civilizations, the same prophecy flickers like a buried ember, a promise that when the heavens once again align as they did before the flood, the memory of the gods will return, and humanity will face its reckoning. The last Anunnaki king foresaw it 13,000 years ago. The Sumerian timekeepers measured its interval. The Atlantean architects encoded it in stone, and the descendants of their legacy, scattered through history, guarded it as the most dangerous truth of all. The return prophecy was not about the gods coming back. It was about us remembering that we were never separate from them. In the oldest tablets of Eridu, the prophecy begins with a warning. When the stars repeat their dance and the sea swells without storm, the children of clay will hear the voice of heaven once more. To the ancients, this voice was literal, the vibration of the earth resonating at the same frequency as the celestial sphere. When that resonance peaks, reality itself seems to thin. Dreams become lucid, intuition sharpens, the veil between worlds dissolves. The prophecy says that during this time, the Sky Kings will speak again, not through thunder or fire, but through memory. Humanity will remember its origin, not as creation, but as continuation. Every culture holds a fragment of this vision. In Egypt, it is the return of Osiris from Orion, bringing light to a world grown dim. The Maya called it the descent of Kukulkan, when the feathered serpent descends the temple steps in shadow and sun, signaling the opening of the portal between heaven and earth. The Hopi elders speak of the blue star Kachina, whose dance will mark the dawn of the fifth world. Even in Norse myth, the end of Ragnarok is not annihilation, but renewal. The gods return, and a new humanity walks the cleansed earth. Each story describes not extinction, but evolution. The flood destroyed the body of the world. The next convergence will awaken its mind. For centuries, the priesthoods and empires tried to silence this prophecy. They feared what would happen if humanity realized that divinity was not external, that the return was an awakening of collective consciousness, not a visitation from the sky. Yet the prophecy endured, hidden in allegory and symbol. It resurfaced in Hermetic texts as the Great Work, in Christian mysticism as the Second Coming, in Eastern philosophy as Kalki's arrival. Different faiths, one meaning, the re-emergence of cosmic memory through the vessel of humankind. Modern science, unknowingly, has begun to echo the same revelation. Quantum physics now speaks of entanglement, that everything in the universe is connected beyond space and time. Neuroscience explores the idea that consciousness may be a field, not an organ, capable of resonating with planetary frequencies. The voice of heaven, described by the ancients, may not be myth at all, but the natural hum of the earth interacting with human awareness. When solar storms strike, our brain waves synchronize with the planet's electromagnetic pulse. When that pulse accelerates, as it is doing now, consciousness expands. The return prophecy may be physics wearing the mask of myth. If the cycle holds true, the next alignment, the same that ended the last age, is approaching. Astronomers track increasing instability in the Earth's magnetic poles. The North Pole drifts faster every year, echoing data that precedes previous reversals. Solar activity surges in unpredictable waves. Cosmic radiation penetrates the atmosphere, altering the ionosphere's resonance. To the uninitiated, these are scientific anomalies. To the heirs of the old knowledge, they are signs. The Earth is preparing to reset its frequency. The Red Wanderer, whether planet, comet, or energy field, draws near again. The prophecy says that when the heavens mirror the earth, a light of remembrance will descend. Some interpret this as an actual celestial event, a burst of solar or cosmic energy activating dormant codes within human DNA. Others see it as spiritual metaphor, the illumination of mind through collective awareness. Either way, the result is the same. The return of what we lost when the flood rewrote time, the reawakening of memory. Humanity, once fragmented, begins to recall its unity. But the prophecy carries a warning. Those who rise in harmony will see the dawn. Those who rise in fear will see the fire. The last king understood this duality. The same resonance that awakens can also destroy. If consciousness meets the new frequency with balance, the world will evolve. If it meets it with chaos, the world will burn. The gods never punished mankind. Mankind punished itself by resonating with imbalance. The return prophecy is not destiny. It is opportunity, a test of collective alignment. Signs of its stirring already appear. People across the globe report vivid dreams of light, ancient cities, and stars falling like rain. Children born in recent decades display unexplainable intuition, sensitivity to frequency, even synesthesia, seeing sound and hearing color. Global consciousness movements rise spontaneously, as if guided by an unseen rhythm. The hum beneath ancient temples grows stronger, measurable by instruments that detect infrasound. It is as if the monuments are awakening to join the chorus. The architect's grid is vibrating again. In 2012, many expected apocalypse and were disappointed, but the prophecy never spoke of ending, only of opening. That year marked the threshold of the return, the first note in a symphony still building. The great cycle takes years to unfold. The Mayan long count reset was not a single moment. It was the first heartbeat of a new age. Since then, the Earth's resonance has accelerated, as if time itself is shortening. The same acceleration was recorded before the last cataclysm, but now the difference is awareness. We can measure what the ancients could only feel. We can choose to listen, and if we listen, truly listen, we may hear the same voice that spoke to the last king as he faced the rising sea. Not a voice of wrath, but of remembrance. You are not apart from the stars. You are their reflection. That is the true meaning of the return. Not that the gods come back to rule, but that humanity remembers it was divine all along. When the red star rises again, when the heavens blaze and the earth hums like a living chord, it will not be an ending. It will be a mirror. Each soul will see itself as it truly is. Architect, timekeeper, heir of the forgotten age. The flood washed away memory. The return will wash away illusion. And after that, the world will not be the same. Because revelation is not a visitation, it is an awakening. And the age that follows, the one written in the codex and whispered in every temple, will be known as the Age of Revelation. The Age of Revelation. The ancients called it Zep Tepi, the first time. The Maya called it the new sun. The Sumerians named it the rebalancing of heaven and earth. Each spoke of a moment when the world would awaken again, when knowledge buried beneath flood and fire would return, not as ruin, but as remembrance. That moment, the culmination of the great cycle, was not merely prophecy, it was inevitability. The earth breathes in epochs, and now, after 13 millennia of sleep, it inhales once more. The age of revelation has begun. At first, it does not appear as miracle, but as disturbance. The magnetic poles drift faster than in recorded history. The auroras dance farther south. Animals migrate along strange new paths, as though following unseen lines of power. The planet's hum, the Schumann resonance, continues to rise, vibrating in sync with human alpha waves. Technology struggles. Time itself feels compressed. Yet amid this turbulence, consciousness begins to quicken. Millions experience synchronicities that defy probability. Forgotten memories surface. Dreams feel more vivid, as if the boundary between sleeping and waking has grown thin. The same signs that heralded the flood now signal something else, not destruction, but awakening. All around the world, humanity begins to look upward again. Scientists, once certain of isolation, now speak openly of cosmic connection. Quantum physicists confirm what mystics always knew, that every particle communicates instantaneously with every other. Solar flares, once dismissed as background noise, are shown to influence human mood and heartbeat. The microcosm and macrocosm reveal their unity. For the first time in millennia, the veil between myth and science starts to dissolve. The language of the last king returns, though we call it by new names: frequency, vibration, energy, consciousness. The gods have not returned because they were never gone. They were equations, waiting to be translated, vibrations waiting to be remembered. In laboratories and observatories, modern timekeepers unknowingly replicate the work of Eridu's priests. They map solar cycles that align with ancient predictions. They record magnetic surges that match the frequencies of sacred sites. The Great Alignment is no longer mythology. It is measurable. When planetary orbits synchronize every 12 to 13,000 years, the entire solar system hums like a struck chord. That hum travels through the sun, through the earth, through every cell of our bodies. The age of revelation is the age of resonance realized. The prophecy was never about gods descending. It was about humanity ascending into awareness of its role within the cosmic design. But revelation is never gentle. To awaken is to remember everything, not only the glory of lost civilizations, but the weight of their failures. As the cycle turns, buried truths surface. Ancient ruins once hidden by sand and sea emerge. Ice melts in Antarctica, revealing structures that challenge our sense of history. Languages once thought indecipherable yield to algorithms that decode them into stories of the flood, the stars, and the return of balance. Even the Earth's magnetic anomalies, those humming beneath Giza, Eridu, and the Andes, pulse stronger, aligning with solar activity as if answering a cosmic call. The planet itself is participating in the revelation. Yet the greatest unveiling happens within. As the resonance rises, human consciousness begins to synchronize. Thought becomes faster, emotion more vivid, empathy expands. For the first time in recorded history, billions begin to feel the same pulse, the heartbeat of the Earth itself. The architects of memory foresaw this and built for it. The temples, pyramids, and megaliths around the globe act as tuning forks, stabilizing the vibration. Their alignment to the stars becomes active again, drawing energy from the heavens and distributing it through the planet's ley lines, a global circuit awakening after 13,000 years of dormancy. Those attuned to it describe sensations of warmth, pressure, and light. Some experience visions of the ancient world, cities of gold beneath blue suns, towers that sang, oceans that glowed at night. Others feel the presence of unseen teachers, not deities, but memories. The consciousness of the last king, the wisdom of the timekeepers, the resonance of the architects, all return as thought, inspiration, intuition. The age of revelation is not an age of gods. It is an age of remembering that the divine never left. Humanity carries it in every atom. But awakening comes with peril. The same frequencies that elevate can also unmake. Those who resist the shift, who cling to fear, control, and division, find the rising energy unbearable. Systems built on secrecy begin to collapse. Institutions rooted in deception fracture beneath the weight of transparency. This too is part of the prophecy. When the light returns, the codex reads, shadows must flee or be consumed. Revelation is not only illumination, it is exposure. The hidden becomes visible, the false unsustainable. The flood of water has passed, the flood of truth begins. And yet, through the chaos, new understanding emerges. Scientists and mystics join hands where once they stood opposed. The language of religion and physics merges into one lexicon of frequency, balance, and design. The myth of separation dissolves. Humanity begins to grasp what the last king tried to teach before the deluge, that civilization is not a collection of empires, but a single organism of memory, breathing through ages. The flood cleansed the body, revelation heals the mind. In this new dawn, the monuments awaken not as relics, but as guides. The Great Pyramid becomes a resonator again, humming faintly under solar storms. The ziggurat of Eridu, long silent, trembles beneath the desert as its ancient chambers pulse with energy. From the Andes to the Himalayas, lights appear atop temples during geomagnetic storms, as if the earth itself is signaling the completion of the cycle. And when the Red Wanderer finally appears once more in the heavens, a faint ember beyond Mars, glowing like memory, humanity will no longer fear it. We will recognize it not as doom, but as confirmation. The cycle has turned. The age of forgetting has ended. The covenant of the last king is fulfilled. The age of revelation is not the end of history. It is history remembering itself. It is the song of creation, once drowned by the flood, now rising again in the hearts of its children. But one final mystery remains. The last question the Codex left unanswered. The last throne left unclaimed. If the gods are memory and humanity is their reflection, then who sits upon the throne of the new age? For the final chapter is not written in stone, but in choice. And the choice, to rise or to repeat, belongs to us. Because beyond revelation awaits the last throne. The last throne. The world stands between memory and becoming. The flood waters of time have receded, leaving behind not ruins but reflections of what we were, of what we could be. The great alignment nears completion. The hum beneath the earth steadies into harmony. The sky glows with new light, faint yet unmistakable. The red wanderer returns, not as omen, but as mirror. Humanity at last gazes into it and sees its own reflection staring back. This is the hour the ancients called the coronation of clay, the moment when mankind, having remembered its origin, must decide its destiny. The final test, the throne awaits. For 13,000 years, we have searched for the gods. In the heavens, in temples, in myths and machines. We have called to them in prayer, in equations, in longing. Yet all along, they were calling from within. The last king understood this as the flood rose around him. He wrote it in the Codex and sealed it beneath Eridu. The gods are not above you. They are the song that breathes through you. The architect of the heavens and the clay of the earth were never separate. The flood was not punishment, but forgetting. Revelation is remembrance. And now, at the edge of a new epoch, we stand where he once stood, at the threshold of choice. The last throne is not a seat of gold or stone. It is the consciousness of humanity itself, the collective realization that creation has always been a dialogue between heaven and earth, between the infinite and the incarnate. To sit upon the throne is not to rule, but to align. It is to remember the covenant that shaped every age, that knowledge without harmony leads to ruin, and wisdom without compassion leads to silence. The flood erased the arrogance of kings. Revelation restores the humility of creators. The throne belongs not to one, but to all. In the ancient tongue, the throne was called Duranki, the bond between heaven and earth. Every civilization that rose after the flood tried to rebuild it in their own image. The ziggurats of Sumer, the pyramids of Egypt, the stepped temples of the Maya, all were attempts to recreate that connection, to reach upward and remember. But now, the bond is no longer architectural. It is internal. Humanity itself has become the temple. Our minds are the chambers, our hearts, the altars. The resonance once held in stone now hums within the human spirit. The age of revelation has fulfilled its purpose. The architects have completed their design. The throne has returned to its rightful place within us. But revelation is not an ending. It is a beginning beyond beginnings. With memory restored, humanity faces the same challenge that ended the age of the gods. Will we wield our rediscovered power to dominate or to harmonize? The red wanderer shines above, indifferent. The earth vibrates beneath, patient. Both await our answer. If we repeat the mistakes of the past, building towers of pride, severing heaven from earth, the cycle will reset once more, and the sea will rise to cleanse us. But if we honor the resonance, if we remember that creation is balance, not control, the cycle will evolve. For the first time, the serpent may bite its tail and not destroy, but complete. All the ages have led to this. The Anunnaki's descent, the flood's cleansing, the Atlantean convergence, the architect's design, all steps in a single unfolding. The purpose was never dominance or worship. It was memory. The gods descended so that we might ascend, not to the heavens, but to understanding. Their reign ended when we forgot. Ours begins when we remember. Now, as the stars align once more, the hum of the earth synchronizes with the rhythm of the human heart. The veil between myth and matter dissolves. The monuments, the myths, the mathematics, all reveal their true function, to guide us here, to this awakening. The Codex whispers its final words. When the song is sung again, the Creator and the created shall be one. The song is beginning. You can hear it in the whisper of wind across stone, in the pulse beneath your feet, in the quiet between your breaths. It is the same tone the last king heard as the waters rose, the same tone the architects carved into the heart of every temple, the tone of remembering, the tone of becoming. And when it reaches its crescendo, when every heart resonates with that frequency, the throne will no longer be hidden. It will not rise from the sand or descend from the sky. It will awaken where it always was, waiting in the silence behind your eyes. Because the last Anunnaki king did not die. He became us. His blood is our blood. His memory is our myth. His throne is our consciousness. And now, as the wheel turns once more, the story that began before history finds its reflection in the mirror of the present. The flood has passed. The stars have returned. The song of creation begins again, not written in clay or carved in stone, but spoken through living beings who finally remember that they too are divine. This is not the end of the story. It is the end of forgetting. The throne is no longer empty. The gods have returned. Through us, the cycle is complete.